Well, hey, it's Romania Black, and it's been a while. And we are diving into 6 chapters of Thousand Autumns today, as we are looking at chapters 15 through 20. We're not quite to the halfway point of volume 1, but we're getting there. I took a couple weeks off, got my hair cut, went to a national competition with the team I coach, came back, and this morning while doing laundry, I have been rewatching my discussion for chapters 11 through 14. And we're doing some different things from the novel, and that's from the Donghua in the novel, and that's a fun time. So before we get started with our new chapter set, though, I do want to talk about some comments that y'all have left while I've been gone, which I've been super appreciative of, so thank you. I also have lots of tea because I've been recording a lot to try to catch up this last week, and my voice, I'm trying not to make it scratchy, y'all. I feel like ever since I got the flu back in March, I've had some phlegm that's just lingered for the last month and a half, and it's not been fun, but we're going to work with it. So going back to the comments, most of these are from chapters 1 and 5, and then we have one from chapters 6 through 10. I got a really big laugh out of Now Namako, who said for chapters 1 through 5, quote, 50 Shades of Yan Wushi, end quote, thanks, I hate it. Look, don't hate the player, hate the game. And then Yejean Lee, 592, for chapters 1 through 5, says, I remember reading the books, finding out about Yan Wushi's disciples, and thinking, Yan Wushi has 2 kids? As much as I like the Donghua, I did get a bit of a whiplash with the tone of the actual novel. I was expecting toxic flirting between the 2 leads immediately, but we get toxic and no flirting yet, lol. Also, kudos for you for trying to figure out all the characters and locations. I gave up thinking I'll remember if they appear enough. In real life, a lot of the setting and characters in the novel are actually historical figures. So for readers who know Chinese history, it's easier to digest and predict. I think it's a double-edged sword because I am from, the US, I'm from a Western audience. So on the one hand, it is a little bit, like if you were growing up with the history and knowledge, then a lot of this would be kind of, I guess, more relatable as you read. But on the other hand, I like that it's not as predictable for me because I don't know the tropes necessarily or the historical background, so that makes it a little bit more fun to try to predict what's going to happen, right? Whereas Chinese readers are like, oh, I know what's going to happen next, And then Sunray said, for Sunray 535, says, historically, the Go Turks did have dealings with China in terms of alliances and fighting against while joining the West to fight the North in AD 552. They noted this for chapters 3 through 5 footnotes. They said in chapter 3, which thank you for looking at these footnotes for me since I'm a little bit scared to go back here for fear of spoilers. They said in chapter 3, internal cultivation is mentioned. The novel's glossary lays it out as the following. It refers to breathing, qi, meditation practices a martial artist must undertake in order to properly harness and utilize their outer cultivation of combat techniques and footwork. As Taoism requires qi and breathing irrevocably linked, a large part of internal cultivation centers on achieving the state of internal breathing. Insert Chinese characters. Practitioners focus on regulating and coordinating their breaths until it becomes second nature. This then grants them the ability to freely manipulate their qi with little effort or conscious thought. Essentially, I've watched another anime where a character has an ability and they just practice it being on all the time so that it just becomes second nature to them. Seems a little similar to that. They say in chapter 4, Shen Qiao is given the suffix Langjun. The footnote says a respectful address for young men, similar to gentlemen. Shen Qiao is indeed a gentleman. In chapter 5, Shen Qiao is giving another suffix, Shen Gongji. Gongji is a, quote, respectful address for young men, though appropriate for all formal occasions, it's often used when the person in question outranks the speaker. And I think from Modao Zushi, especially, I remember Gongji being used a lot, so because a lot of people in that series are pretty formal when they talk to each other, so that makes sense. But thank you, Sunray. And then Altair Nair 3702 for chapters 1 through 5 says, I also love the way that Yangshen is not being love at first sight. And it leaves more like space for the individual characters to shine because Shen Qiao and Yan Wushi are such distinct people from the get-go. And getting to watch how they could possibly fall for each other, it's its own kind of fascinating mystery. Yeah, and this author is teasing the crud out of Yan Wushi being there and then leaving. So it's like, what do we do with that? And then Pure Golden Grace 5810 for chapters 6 through 10 says, it's so real what you just said of this. Being a different vibe from MXTX novels, which focus on romance, there is a joke that Meng Chi Shi writes romance for those who are not very into romance. Ha! But it's still so interesting to see how it develops. I especially like that this is not just a repeat of MXTX's works. I love them dearly, but that's what makes them special. MXTX has a very distinct style of writing, which I love, and this is very different, but also very quality, which, you know, variety is the spice of life. So anyway, thank you all so much for your comments. I have really appreciated them over the last couple weeks. I'm really excited to see how people comment about chapters 11 through 14 and where that goes. But I've really enjoyed reading y'all's comments and then incorporating them into the intro for this as we get into chapters 15 through 20. We're halfway through the novel, almost. It doesn't look like it, but we're about to be. And we have 3 more weeks of volume 1, which is sad because I really like this cover. But then we're going to be getting into volume 2, which is pretty exciting. So we're going to see where it all goes to from here, but thank you all so much for reading along with me. We're not going to waste any more time, though. We are going to dive into part 4 of our journey with 1,000 Autumns, and then we'll look at the audio drama afterwards. I'll talk about it, but we're going to get that started here in 3, 2, 1, and I'm going to take a big old swig of tea. My tea and honey don't let me down. And we're going to start out with Chapter 15 on page 143. Meeting Yan Wushi again. just go right into it. Yan Wushi was so angry, he had to laugh. Sect Leader Shen's heart is truly as vast as the ocean, because Shen Qiao was like, being very stoic last chapter. It's a pity not everyone on your Xuandu Mountain feels the same. Otherwise, how could they allow Kunye to knock down the great Qi Feng's disciple off a cliff? Shen Qiao shook his head, but he didn't speak. His memory was now blurry and fragmented. He could remember some things, but not others. As he was unclear on all the details of the fight and his fall, there wasn't much he could say. But Yan Wushi, without warning, lifted his palm and struck at him. It wasn't the light strike of a child's play attack. It was solid, using 1/3 of his martial power. Given the gulf between their current strength, forget 3/10 of Yan Wushi's power, even 1/10 would have left Shen Qiao helpless to withstand it. Anyone watching would think Yan Wushi was trying to kill him and that Shen Qiao had no chance of escape. Shen Qiao's breathing became ragged and a glob. I like that the author phrases it as anyone watching would think, which leads us as the audience to believe that that's not his intention. A glob of blood surged to the back of his throat, but he forcefully held it down. Yan Wushi's true chi was just like him. It raged towards him like a fierce and unyielding flow of a river, almost substantial in its might. And in the midst of this desperate moment, with his life hanging in the balance, his heart actually calmed, and an exquisite weightless feeling came over him. The same darkness remained behind Shen Qiao's eyes, but beyond that darkness a massive and sweeping river of stars burst into existence. The universe is fathomless, the heavens and earth vast. From time and immemorial, the course of nature has run eternal, and amidst all this, human beings are impossibly small. If I wish to become one with the heaven, ascending to godhood and returning to the void, then rivers and mountains, sun and moon, the heavens, the clouds, all of them would be me. There'd be no boundaries between all that exists in the world and me. That was what Shen Qiao felt in that moment. That feels, he couldn't tell if it was his fragmented memories revealing themselves, or if reading the Zhu Yang strategy scroll had left it deeply engraved upon his heart. Along with the familiar words that floated to the surface of his mind, within his heart was a phenomenon like moonlight seeping through leaves, like a faint glow blooming into radiance, ethereally, flawlessly clear. The true chi, long stagnant and lost, began to trickle faintly through his limbs and bones, delicate, boundless, and unending. Yan Wushi's palm strike crashed down heavy as a mountain and swift as a whirling gale. No ordinary person could follow it with the naked eye, but Shen Qiao saw everything clearly. Behind him was the wall. There was nowhere to dodge, so he chose to meet it head on. With his frail and sickly body, he stood against 3/10 of Yan Wushi's strength. Yan Wushi had fought both Qi Fengge and Zhu Yuang to a standstill, and they were the world's top martial artists and the grandmasters of their generation. Needless to say, he was terrifyingly strong. Forget about Shen Qiao, even Mu Rongchen, the Emperor of Qi's #1 expert, would be on a shaky ground if he faced 3/10 of Yan Wushi's strength. And yet, Shen Qiao managed to withstand him. He wasn't smashed flat against the wall, and he didn't cough up blood and die. His face was so pale it was almost transparent, but his feet moved not even half an inch. The sleeves of his robes billowed high from the impact of Qi, and even the ribbon on his head came undone, hair scattering down as it fluttered wildly. The blasts of Qi met, one strong and one weak, but for a moment, the weaker one held. Yan Wushi raised his eyebrows just a bit, but he showed little surprise. Instead, his expression said that he'd expected this. Xuandu Mountain's cultivation methods focus on spiritual stillness and non-interference, on standing aloof from worldly affairs. Meet what's strong with strength, what's soft with softness. We're going to talk about that in the discussion. Once the union is flawless and complete, the will of heaven shall become as clear as water. I'm sorry, but you can take this phrase in a very, I'm not going to wait till the discussion. You can take this phrase in a very sexual manner, like, not the meet what's strong with strength, but my mind is immediately in the gutter when I read Don Mai. And so what's soft with softness? So, if you encounter something that's soft, you just happen to like embrace it with a soft touch, and then once the union is flawless and complete, which maybe once they get together, the heaven will be, just work with me here. The words flashed swiftly through Shen Qiao's mind. But then he realized that his potential being released had little to do with the Xuandu Mountain, and more to do with the fact that the true Qi he was admitting showed faint signs of intermingling with Yan Wushi's. So we're getting this right off the bat. As the two billows of true Qi confronted each other, they also influenced each other. It was evident that they shared a common source. Well, let's not get into any incestual stuff here. I'm joking. But ultimately, the difference in strength was too vast. Yan Wushi barely needed to push any harder. Only a drop more pressure and Shen Qiao was completely unable to withstand it. His complexion turned yellow and blood spurted from his mouth again. But just then, Yan Wushi withdrew his hand. So it's true. Keenly interested, he said, I've suspected it since I felt your pulse. You've already cultivated using the Zhuyang strategy scroll at Xuandu Mountain. Qi Fengge passed it down to you, didn't he? Which you wouldn't have been able to remember it, so that makes sense. Shen Qiao could only hear a buzzing in his ears. Yan Wushi's voice seemed to come from across a great distance, beyond the endless horizon. He slid down the wall, falling to the ground in a heap. So that night at Chuyun Temple, he said, you deliberately made me recite the scroll. Indeed, said Yan Wushi. The Zhuyang strategy is composed of 5 volumes. Here we go. The volume of Lost Soul is at Xuandu Mountain. Oh, okay. And since you're Qi Fengge's successor, you must have cultivated with it. Otherwise, you'd be lucky simply surviving your fall from Bamboo Peak. Your body wouldn't have retained a speck of vitality, let alone allowed you to gradually recover your vision and martial arts. Didn't you think it was extraordinary? Your body remembers the Zhuyang strategy you trained with, even though you lack the memory of it at the moment. That thread of true Qi remains a part of you, and it's slowly helping you recuperate. That night I made you recite the volume of diluted thought because I wanted to use it to stimulate your memories. I wanted to see whether you could combine that scroll and the one you'd already trained with and integrate the contents of both volumes. Shen Qiao had only a wisp of breath within him. This humble Shen is only a cripple. Why would sect leader Yan spend so much effort on me? Yan Wushi smiled slyly. The appearance of the volume of diluted thought drew many factions out to fight for it. But sadly, I destroyed the original at Chuyun Temple, so only those who were present could hear it. Once they return to their sects, they inevitably must write down what they heard. And, in order to confound others, they're also certain to mix in some falsehoods and release a few extra versions. All factions will fight over them. There are many sects that couldn't make it that night, and once they hear the news, how could they not act? They'll employ every possible method and scheme to get their hands on the real copy of the scroll. And so there will be rise, conflict after conflict, both hidden and overt. Don't you find it incredibly interesting? Shen Qiao closed his eyes. How does that benefit you? Of course there are benefits, said Yan Wushi. But they have nothing to do with you, so you needn't worry. All you need to know is that you've also greatly benefited from this incident. After all, in all this world, anyone who can get a glimpse of any volume is already enormously fortunate. There are very few who come by multiple volumes like you have. Continue your training, and it might be possible to return to your old level. Shouldn't you show me some gratitude? Sect leader Yan Wushi gripped Shen Qiao's chin and forced him to raise his head. Didn't you call me Shizun before? Why such a quick change? I want, Shen Qiao murmured, his words somewhat slurred. Yan Wushi bent forward a little, lowering his head to listen. Without warning, Shen Qiao spat another mouthful of blood. Yan Wushi had no time to let go, and blood splattered all over his hand. Murderous intent poured from Yan Wushi's eyes. I already said I want to cough up blood, Shen Qiao said weakly. It wasn't on purpose. He'd yet to finish his words when he collapsed sideways, unconscious. Oh my God! Yan Wushi was trying his hardest to flirt and be like, what do you have to say to that? And Shen Qiao's like, I got a bleh. Man, Shen Qiao is his own cock block. It's great. Okay, all right. We're already getting stuff. In his daze, he felt like he was floating in midair, swaying and drifting. Even his mind had drifted far away, and he didn't know how much time had passed before it fluttered back, settling inside his body once more. As he opened his eyes, Shen Qiao heard someone sigh beside him. How difficult life is. Why are you still alive? Isn't it agonizing for you that you can almost never manage to die? What a diva. It was Yan Wushi's voice. Shen Qiao didn't reply. He felt there was definitely something wrong with this man. Yan Wushi already did whatever he pleased, and he was singularly unreasonable. Like what he'd done with the Zhiyong Strategies volume of Diluted Thought. A priceless secret manual, and he destroyed it just like that. He didn't even leave himself a way out of it. People everywhere would kill for a glimpse of that scroll, but would never get it. And Yan Wushi had given Shen Qiao the opportunity to read it, just like that. When he'd been met with Qinggong's betrayal, when he'd been faced with Mu Tipo surrounding him with his men, Yan Wushi must have been nearby. Yet he'd stood by and watched, making no move to intervene. Only after Shen Qiao had saved himself did Yan Wushi turn up. And only then did he lash out like he was trying to kill him, which it turned out was to stimulate the true chi from the Zhiyong strategy that was still in Shen Qiao's body. But Shen Qiao was by no means self-absorbed enough to believe that Yan Wushi held him in any high regard, enough to painstakingly train Shen Qiao. He told himself it was simply a manifestation of this man's erratic, mercurial personality, and hence it was too hard to reason anything about him. Oh yeah, that's going to come back. That's going to be a central plot point, I'm sure, at some point in this novel. Mu Tipo's attendants have come to look for him, and Qinggong is with them. He put you square in the sights of a sycophant like Mu Tipo. It's not too late to kill him, you know. Shen Qiao shook his head without speaking, and then slowly propped himself up in a sitting position on the bed with his elbows. As he did, he discovered that coughing up all those mouthfuls of blood had actually left his chest much relieved. The dull pain was gone. He must have managed, by some lucky fluke, to cough up the stagnant blood from inside of him, and it helped him heal his injuries. I'm pretty sure that Yan Wushi's palm strike helped do that too, just saying. Thank you, Sect Leader Yan, he said. Yan Wushi was very frank. I didn't expect you to spit out that stagnant blood either. I only wanted to force you to use the Zhiyong strategy's true chi. Sure, Jan, sure. Shen Qiao heard the implication behind his words. If you hadn't survived, you'd have died in vain. Then what does Sect Leader Yan plan to do next? I like how he's so formal with him, you know. I'll go with you to Xuandu Mountain. Shen Qiao was silent for a moment. The corner of his mouth twitched. Sect Leader Yan has a myriad of affairs to attend to every day. Why would you waste your precious time on someone like me? Yan Wushi stroked his face in an imitation of love, as if Shen Qiao were a child. He had no way to stop him and could only let Yan Wushi grip his chin and look him up and down like a piece of personal property. Your sect has the Zhuyang strategy's volume of lost soul tucked away somewhere. Xuandu Mountain is so large, even though nobody there is my match, searching for it would be such a bother. Wouldn't you binging with me make things simpler? Sure, Jan. You wish for me to recall the contents of the scroll and write it down for you? Yang Wushi smiled contemptuously. Only the mediocre need to read the text and write it down word by word. I've already cultivated with the scroll in the inner palace of Northern Zhu. And I've seen the volume of diluted thought. With 2 of the 5, I've already grasped the essence of the Zhuyang strategy. Rather than read something you've written down, which could very well be lies, I can just fight you directly. That way, I'll be able to decipher the mysteries of the scroll that's hidden at Xuandu Mountain. He said to Shen Qiao, the true Zhantian state lies not in a person's form, much less in mimicking them. Each path is forged by a human being. Tao Hongjing was able to combine the strengths of the 3 schools of thought, so of course I can create martial arts that go beyond his. He sounded ridiculously arrogant, insufferably so. But on closer contemplation, Shen Qiao actually agreed with him. It was down to his own principles that Yang Wushi was able to become the leader of a sect, and his martial art prowess was such that he could live as he pleased. Given all that, he was indeed worthy of becoming a grandmaster who could stand at the summit of the world. There was only one issue. There was no pleasure in interacting with this man on a daily basis, from dawn to dusk. It was absolute torture. Oh yes, these 2 that don't like each other that are forced to be together because Yang Wushi just wants to, use Shen Qiao to get all 5 volumes. Sure. I like this twist. I like that this is a little bit more than the Donghua. We'll see where this goes. Yang Wushi released him. Since you're awake now, we'll head out tomorrow, he said indifferently. Do I have a choice? Said Shen Qiao helplessly. You can choose to walk out on your own while you're still relatively unwounded, or we can fight another round. Then I'll take you with me after I injure and cripple you. Shen Qiao had nothing to say to this. I love me a acquaintance to enemies to lovers story, don't we? Chapter 16, Good and Evil. Of course, with Yan Wushi around, there was no need to take the safer main roads. To save time, Yan Wushi didn't pass through Chang'an, but instead went directly south to Lo Province, and then on to Yu Province and Sui Province from there. This route drastically shortened the distance of their journey, but at the same time it led them through some less than peaceful areas, since they were close to the Shijiao border. After the disastrous drought of the previous year, where parched land stretched for thousands of kilometers, refugees were everywhere, and they were all flocking to the surrounding provinces and counties where food and vegetation was more plentiful. Even now, Shen Qiao and Yang Wushi still saw many displaced wandering people along their journey. Few people in the world could match Yan Wushi when it came to martial arts, but he made for an awfully poor travel companion. Shen Qiao had yet to recover from his injuries. His eyes were sometimes good, sometimes bad, and had never returned to normal. At most, it was like before, where he could vaguely see smudges of light and shadow. Yang Wushi showed him no gentleness on account of this, nor did he offer him any special accommodation. As Yang Wushi didn't need a carriage, he didn't rent one. Instead, he walked on ahead of Shen Qiao at a steady pace, his manner practically shouting, "Keep up if you can, and you'd better keep going if you can't." And so, they traveled one in front of the other, one in front and the one at back, for several days. Just outside Zhang Province's city, they encountered another group of refugees. These people were originally from Guang Province. Because of the famine there, they'd been forced to trek vast distances to the more affluent Zhang Province. But the governor of Zhang Province had refused to open the city gates for them, and ordered his soldiers to keep a strict guard forbidding them from letting a single one inside. The refugees lacked the strength to try their luck anywhere else, so all they could do was station themselves there outside the city. For all practical purposes, they were waiting for their slow deaths to overtake them. From the perspective of the imperial administration, one couldn't blame the governors for acting as they did. A city's food was limited. If they let the refugees in, they'd be responsible for arranging space for them, even though they were officially someone else's citizens. It'd add more stress to the Zhang province itself, and if a time came when Zhang province didn't have enough food, the locals would suffer too. The Emperor of Qi, Gao Wei, was busy with his pursuit of hedonism, completely unwilling to manage the affairs of state. Before the food the court distributed to the provinces even made it to them, they'd already embezzled away. Not to mention, if the governor of Zhang province did let these refugees into the city, they'd get no appreciation from it from the court. Zhang province was close to Xuandu Mountain. With a few more days of the southwestward travel, they'd reach that mountain, which stood just to the next of the Mian province. As they got closer to Xuandu Mountain, the better Yang Wushi's mood became. It had become so good, in fact, that he slowed his pace and waited for Shen Qiao to catch up. He was even in the mood to point out the local customs and culture to him. If someone didn't know better, they might have thought that the two were longtime friends traveling together. He said to Shen Qiao, during the Warring States period, Zhang province belonged to Chu, so Chu influence is strong here. The land is also rich and populous. A pity that Gao Wei does not care to manage it. Generations of the Gao family's hard work will most likely be lost at his hands. Yang Wushi obviously had not the slightest respect for the Emperor of Qi. He'd call him by his name straight off the bat. Shen Qiao squinted and saw the blurry figures of many people gathered outside the city. Children and women, both young and old, made up the majority. Their one bit of good fortune was the weather wasn't too hot, otherwise a rampant plague would have probably arisen in such an encampment. He shook his head helplessly and sighed. The common people live such difficult lives. Unmoved, Yang Wushi replied. Truth be told, this kind of scene plays out in other countries as well. Since the uprising of the 5 barbarians at the end of the Western Jin dynasty, all sorts of factions have competed for authority, and countless lives were lost while they did. This kind of famine happened every year, especially on the borders. Each country tried to transfer their problems to someone else, to absolve themselves of responsibility, and they eagerly pushed their refugees onto other countries. When the plentiful years arrived, they just launched another war to annex the cities of neighboring countries. Mutinies were common and regimes changed every turn. No one puts real thought into state administration, since countries change hands and names every few years. Northern Qi is just a more aggravated case. I feel like the author is making some social commentary here, especially about like regime changes and things like that, and making war when things are better. It just feels a little on the nose. But I heard that sect leader Yan maintains another identity as a high-ranking official, and that the Emperor Zhou relies on you heavily. I suppose that in your mind you believe that Northern Zhou has the best chance of unifying the lands? Yan Wushi shrugged. Enlightened or not, emperors are all the same, he said lazily. The only difference is that some are able to curb their desires, while others are not, and they don't wish to. Yuan Yang is hawkish and quick to kill, but he prohibits Buddhism and Taoism, and also dislikes Confucianism. And he isn't inclined to favor any particular side. He's left with very few choices, and since I wish to unify the 3 demonic sects, I'll need his assistance. The Yuan family has been in the Central Plains for many years. Although their ancestors were Xianbei people, they've long acculturated to the Han. Their methods and systems of Zhou are all the same as the Han ones. So if a Yuan became emperor of the United Land, they probably wouldn't do any worse than the Southern Qin. After journeying for a great many days and hearing about a great many things, Shen Qiao had gained a general understanding of the workings of the world as well. Buddhist Master Zhu Ting, who'd intervened to stop Yang Wushi that night at Qiyun Temple, was once a supporter of Northern Zhou. However, he'd supported the old regent Yuan Hu, not the current emperor Yuan Yang. Buddhist Master Zhu Jing came from the Tiantai sect and was the martial brother of Fei Yi, Tiantai sect's current leader. But Tiantai sect itself favored Southern Qin, so the whole matter was wrapped up in the sect's internal feuds. It was a lengthy tale of its own. Yuan Yang had to untangle the state from its relationships with the Buddhist sects after he seized back his stolen power, especially if he wanted to eliminate Yuan Hu's remaining influence. And so, nowadays, the Zhu Ting line occupied something of an awkward position within the Northern Zhou. Although it hadn't lost its status completely, Buddhist Master Zhu Ting would never be able to restore their former glory as long as Yuan Yang was in power. In Yuan Yang's eyes, the 3 schools of thought had their own ambitions. If he became involved in any one ideology, then his style of governance would inevitably be colored by them. As an emperor with a strong sense of autonomy, he rankled at the thought. In contrast, although Huan Yu's sect had its own goals, they were clearly more suited to cooperation than the other sects, and they wouldn't ask Yuan Yang to promote a certain doctrine or trying to sway his thinking. As Yang Wushi and Shen Qiao conversed, they walked on towards the city gates. When ordinary people or merchants were entering the city, they often needed to travel as a group to ward off harassment from the refugees, and it went best if there was a male guard with them. This was because the refugees, driven into a corner by starvation, could turn to banditry and stealing from others by force. If beautiful women or children fell into the hands of bandits, not only would their virginity be in danger, but they might also end up in a stew pot. Well, that's nice. It's glad to know that the refugees that are desperate could possibly result to sexual assault and cannibalism. Awesome. With all this going on around them, Yang Wushi and Shen Qiao together made for a rather peculiar and eye-catching combination. One was empty-handed and carried nothing, while the other leaned on a bamboo cane, looking frail and like a man recovering from a serious illness. They certainly did not seem like ordinary travelers. From time to time, the roadside vagrants would go up to them and beg, but a glance was enough to tell that Yang Wushi wasn't to be trifled with. They avoided him out of fear, and turned instead to Shen Qiao, who looked meek and more easily persuaded. One group was a husband and wife dragging 3 or 4 children behind them up the road. They were skeletal, and barely looked human any longer, more like puppets or zombies. Even their expressions were wooden. The oldest child could not be more than 6 or 7 years old, while the youngest was only 2 or 3. The last one hobbled and stumbled along since her parents lacked the strength to carry her. Clutching a corner of her mother's robes, she followed them, staggering. If things went on like this, the girl would end up exchanged for the child of another family to earn her parents a mouthful of food, or she'd be cooked and eaten by the parents themselves. People were pushed to the brink in such troubled times, and even the concerns of blood and family could be set aside for the sake of survival. When the husband and wife saw Shen Qiao walk past, they fell to their knees and begged him for food. Shen Qiao thought for a moment, and then fished out a portion of wrapped flatbread from his lapels and gave it to the youngest child. The couple were overjoyed, and they thanked him again and again. Then the husband snatched the bread from the child's hands and immediately took a huge bite. When he saw his wife and children staring at him, he hesitated for a long while before reluctantly breaking off a small piece and offering it to his wife. The wife took the small piece of flatbread, but didn't eat it herself. Instead, she carefully broke it into several precious pieces and divided them among the children. The flatbread wasn't large, and soon they wolfed it down in a couple of bites. The nearby refugees watched them with covetous eyes, which they turned to glare ferociously at Shen Qiao. The husband begged Shen Qiao, "The children have been hungry for days. Please, Your Excellency, give them another flatbread so they can hold on until we get to the city." But Shen Qiao refused. "I'm not wealthy either. I only had two flatbreads with me. I've given you one, but I must also keep one for myself." When the husband heard that Shen Qiao still had food on him, his expression immediately changed. Seeing Shen Qiao's dull-eyed gaze and how he relied on a bamboo cane for support, his thoughts took an ugly turn. He lunged for Shen Qiao. Before he could even touch his sleeve, he'd already been sent flying in the opposite direction. He landed heavily on the ground with a wretched scream. Despite this, Shen Qiao still looked as sickly and frail as he always had been. Looking at him, it was impossible to tell that he'd just sent a man flying. Of course, Shen Qiao hadn't expected his moment of kindness to end up this way. He looked at the man's wife and children again, and they all huddled together, clutching each other in terror. When the covetous refugees who'd been watching eagerly saw the scene play out, they became too afraid to try anything. The husband crawled upright arduously, but instead of begging for mercy, he cursed at Shen Qiao. "Well, go on, kill me! People like you are the biggest hypocrites, handing out alms just so you can relish our kowtows and thanks. If you're going to help someone, why not save them completely? You clearly still have a flatbread, why not take it out? If you didn't want to give that to us, then don't give us anything. Instead, you gave us one taste of relief, but nothing more, nothing filling. You might as well just kill us." Shen Qiao sighed and shook his head. He said nothing and only turned and left. The entire time, Yang Wushi was standing a short distance away, hands clasped behind his back. He neither intervened nor moved. It was as if he simply waited for Shen Qiao, but with a shadow of a smile on his face. Now, of course, everyone knew he had food on him, but all they could do was watch as he left. Yang Wushi waited until he was close before saying, "Have you ever heard the saying, 'A cup full of rice begets gratitude, while a cart full of rice begs resentment'?" Shen Qiao sighed. "I was too rash. There are so many suffering, it's impossible to save them all myself. A father didn't even care whether his children lived or died, yet you stepped in and did his job for him. Sect leader Shen really does possess a benevolent heart full of love." Yang Wushi ridiculed him. "It's just a pity that human greed knows no bounds and can't fathom your good intentions. If you hadn't been able to defend yourself today, you probably would have ended up as a stew by now. Shen Qiao considered his words seriously. If I couldn't defend myself, I wouldn't have taken this road. I'd have chosen a longer route to avoid places where refugees gathered. It's human nature to seek benefits and avoid harm. I am neither a saint nor an exception. But when someone is suffering right in front of me, I can't bear to stand by and watch. He clung stubbornly to goodness, but Yang Wushi believed it was human nature to do evil. On a fundamental level, they had no common ground. Yang Wushi could doubtlessly kill Shen Qiao with his martial arts, but even choking Shen Qiao wouldn't get him to change his point of view. After this little interlude, the slight easing in the atmosphere between them completely vanished. Well, they're just at odds and they're not going to agree on anything, are they? Sir! The voice was small, weak, and came from behind them. Shen Qiao turned and saw a blurred silhouette, short and skinny, likely a child. The child ran to him and knelt down, then kowtowed to him 3 times with utmost seriousness. Thank you, sir, for giving us the bread. Father was rude to you, but all I can do is kowtow to you and ask you for your great forgiveness. Please don't hold it against him. Of course, Shen Qiao wouldn't hold any grudge when a child was involved. He sighed and helped him stand up. I didn't take it to heart. I've heard that Buddha's birthday is soon. The people of Zhang province are Buddhists, so the temples will set up facilities and hand out kanji. They'll allow some refugees into the city then. There's still a chance you'll survive. The child's eyes shone, and he thanked Shen Qiao repeatedly. Well, thanks for telling me, sir. What is this gentleman's honored name? When I've got the chance, the slowly one will repay his debts and set up a longevity tablet for you for sure. Shen Qiao patted his head warmly. That isn't necessary. Just take good care of your mother and your younger siblings. A memorial tablet erected in a person's name is to wish them good fortune and a long life. The child nodded vigorously, and then he whispered, Don't worry. I didn't eat the flatbread Mother gave me. I snuck it to my sister. When Shen Qiao heard this, he sighed to himself. His heart ached at the child's maturity. After a moment, he pulled out the remaining flatbread from his lapels and handed it to the young boy. Take this back and eat it. Don't let your father find out again. The child, so hungry that he was jaundiced and emaciated, somehow managed to find the strength to absolutely refuse the flatbread. In the end, Shen Qiao had to force it into his hand. If you keep pushing it away, so will everyone else will see. And then there'll be trouble again. Only then did the child accept it. Once again, he keeled and kowtowed to Shen Qiao. Please, won't this gentleman tell me his name? He insisted. My name is Shen Qiao. Shen Qiao. The child mulled it over several times. Perhaps he'd taken the Qiao as another Qiao with a different meaning, though it was impossible to know. Shen Qiao had said nothing to correct him. The child left, looking back 3 times at each step he took. It's late, said Yang Wushi. Let's hurry up and enter the city. Shen Qiao noticed how he made no mocking remarks this time and found it odd. You're not going to say anything? Some people just like doing stupid things, Yang Wushi said coolly. Even if you chide them, they won't listen. Why should this venerable one waste his breath? Shen Qiao rubbed his nose and smiled, saying nothing. There was indeed much malice in the world, but he refused to let that quash his belief in kindness and benevolence. He felt the flatbread had been well worth the exchange for that little shred of goodwill. Yang Wushi's like, what was the point? What am I going to say to you? It's not going to make any difference. At the foot of Chapter 17, Old Friends Reunion. At the foot of Xuandu Mountain was Xuandu Town, which had been a peaceful little town for many years. Being located right next to a world-famous Taoist sect meant little to the townspeople. At most, they treated the Taoist priests who came down the mountain with extra courtesy and respect. When the residents of Xuandu Mountain would occasionally leave the mountain for purchases, as the dignified #1 Taoist sect in the world, of course they'd always pay according to full market prices. They dealt fairly, and they never used their influence as a great sect to push around the common people. And so, for all these years, the people of Xuandu Town had always been proud to be neighbors with the Taoist priests from Xuandu's Violet Palace. But that was all. For a Taoist sect was, after all, a Taoist sect. Once you took up the path of Xuandu, you became a person detached from the mundane realm. Their lives were a world apart from the lives of the common folk down below the mountain, who rose to work with dawn and went to rest at dusk. When Shen Qiao and Yang Wushi arrived at Xuandu town, the place was livelier than usual. People came and went, and among them there were many martial artists, as well as more than a few Taoists in Taoist dress. 10 days from now, Xuandu's Violet Palace will hold a Jade Terrace discussion, said Yang Wushi. There, they'll determine the path the orthodoxy should take, and they've invited sages and scholars from all over to join the event. It's said that all major sects have sent people, even envoys from Lishan Academy and Tianti sect will come. What does it mean to determine the path the orthodoxy should take? Asked Shen Qiao. Just then, the two of them were sitting in a tea house and looking outside. Yan Wushi took a sip of tea. Oh, we're getting into it. Here we go. In your absence, Xuandu Mountain must have someone in charge. As long as that person's identity isn't announced to the public, no one will know who he is. He'll find a reason to show himself eventually. When you were sect leader, you kept such a low profile that no one could even recognize you. But that doesn't mean everyone else will be the same. No. Shen Qiao had long ago become accustomed to Yang Wushi's style of speech and its ever-present hint of sarcasm. Given Yang Wushi's status and position, there were indeed very few people who could catch his eye. On Xuandu Mountain, nobody had been worthy of his proper attention since the deceased Chifengge. He might have been quarrelsome, but the man he'd been matched with was so outstandingly good-natured, his temper so difficult to arouse, even picking a fight might have become difficult to do. So the relationship became something not quite enemies, but not quite friends. And on the long journey together, they managed to achieve a delicate kind of balance. What's happening down there? Shen Qiao's attention was drawn by something nearby, downstairs. He squinted, but he still couldn't make it out. It hadn't yet been long enough for his eyes to fully recover. In broad daylight, right under the sun, he couldn't keep them open too long without tears streaming down his face. Giving out kanji and medicine to the poor. Of course, Yang Wushi didn't have the power of foresight, but when he wanted to know something, someone informed him of it well ahead of time. I love that they've slowly developed this little, we're not friends, we're not enemies, we're just acquaintances traveling together sort of dynamic. He picked up a piece of osmanthus-flavored candy lotus with his chopsticks and popped it into his mouth. After UI took over as acting sect leader, he started sending disciples to Xuandu town on the 1st and 15th of every month, he said casually. They set up an altar and preached Taoist doctrines. I've heard that the rain prayers from the disciples of Xuandu's Violet Palace are very effective. Nowadays, if quite a while goes by without rain, the governor of Mian province will send people up to the mountain to ask them to come down and pray for rain. And so, Xuandu Mountain gains more and more followers. In Xuandu town alone, something like 8 or 9 people out of 10 greatly revere Xuandu's Violet Palace. Yang Wushi looked like he was watching a good show. But Shen Qiao's frown grew deeper and deeper. You've remembered everything, said Yang Wushi. It wasn't a question, but a statement of affirmation. Although his body was still somewhat sickly and weak, ever since Shen Qiao spat out that stagnant blood that had been in his chest, the bewilderment on his face had faded with each passing day. Recovering his memories had only been a matter of time. Yang Wushi had noticed, but he hadn't pressed Shen Qiao about it because he didn't know exactly how much he remembered. From the look of him now, he probably recovered nearly all of his memories. Shen Qiao sighed and didn't deny it. For several generations, the sect leaders of Xuandu Mountain have flatly refused to involve themselves in worldly affairs. No matter how the dynasties changed, it remained as stable as it has always been. Tao Hongjing was the #1 martial artist in the world and a man of great genius. Yet because he'd involved himself in politics, Mount Mao's Shangqi sect fell apart after his death and the disciples scattered. What does Yui think he's doing here? Ooh! Yan Wushi raised an eyebrow. Is that what Chifengge taught you? To cower in your shell like a turtle? If he was all alone, then it'd be fine to only focus on his own moral purity and give no thoughts to others, but he was the leader of a sect, and yet he didn't want to advance. He spent all day just thinking about how his sect had to remain hidden from the world and not interfere. If it went on like that, could Xuandu Mountain really hold on to its position as the #1 Taoist sect? I find that little acting sect leader of yours much clearer-minded than you. Xuandu Mountain had maintained its reputation and status as the world's #1 Taoist sect for several generations, and successive sect leaders had espoused the Taoist principles of spiritual stillness and non-interference. They were bent on avoiding the world for all time and absolutely refused to involve themselves with its state of affairs. Qifengge, who had held the undisputed crown when it came to martial arts, was no exception. Later, when Shen Qiao had taken over as sect leader, he'd taken this idea of keeping a low profile to the extreme. The world only ever learned that Xuandu Mountain had a new sect leader, that his surname was Shen, and nearly nothing else. And so even though Shen Qiao was running about everywhere with Yan Wushi, almost no one had recognized him. Yan Wushi was ostentatious and egotistical by nature. He always did as he pleased. Naturally, he had nothing but contempt for Xuandu Mountain's way of doing things. Shen Qiao didn't get angry at his words. He only said, "Tonight I wish to find a chance to head up to the mountain and speak with Yui personally. Would sect leader Yan like to come with me, or wait for me here at the foot of the mountain?" Oh, that is okay. Why not wait until the Jade Terrace discussion to reveal yourself and cross-examine Yui in front of everyone? Why not take back your rightful position as sect leader? If I do that, Xuandu Mountain's reputation would suffer a great blow. Shen Qiao shook his head. I fear there's more to this matter than meets the eye. To get to the bottom of things, I must first ask Yui. Yan Wushi didn't care one way or the other. Oh well, then go ask. With their prestigious title of #1 Taoist sect, Xuandu Mountain received few people with the gall to come barging in on their own. But Yan Wushi said it like he was ordering an extra bowl of rice offhand, because he may as well have been. His expression utterly unconcerned, he stroked the edge of a plate. The dish of disordered, scattered fried green beans promptly stacked themselves into 3 neat layers. Every layer even had the exact same number of green beans. This was a technique using true chi to manipulate objects across space, and he'd already perfected it to a terrifying degree. Oh, that's cool. The Demon Lord's reemergence in the Zhangqiu was only widely known because of his duel with Kunye. And it was only because Kunye had recently defeated Shen Qiao that the rumors painted Yan Wushi as practically divine. In reality, there were very few people who had first-hand knowledge of his present martial prowess. If someone saw him using his martial arts, which could easily take off a man's head to stack a bunch of fried green beans, who knew what they would think? You're at a less than third of your peak strength. Can you make it up there by yourself? Yan Wushi asked. There's a path along the cliff by the back mountain, said Shen Qiao. The terrain there is steep and there are no guards. There's an array formation working as a barrier, and outsiders know nothing of its inner workings, so if they charge up the path, they'll just get dizzy and turned around. They could even fall from the cliff. Their martial prowess might not save them, no matter how strong they are. At first, Yan Wushi had been indifferent, and had only asked about the excursion for his own amusement, but when he heard this, he became a little interested after all. Then I must go and see it for myself. I love the green bean. We're going to talk about the green bean stacking thing. That's awesome. Night fell. The lively Xuandu town calmed down, drifting into dreams beneath a full sky of stars. Shen Qiao took a route up the mountain that seemed completely without rhyme or reason. Sometimes it was tortuous and winding. Sometimes it deliberately avoided an easy walk up the stepped stones and opted for a steep nearby slope instead. But there was a purpose. The stone path and the foliage were integrated into an invisible formation array. 9 out of 10 times, the ignorant would fall into the trap. Even if they weren't ensnared, they'd activate the alarm, alerting Xuandu Mountain disciples. Yan Wushi had no interest in Shen Qiao and Yui's conversation or the internal feuds within Xuandu Mountain. He was more taken by the formations that concealed on this path. He trailed far behind Shen Qiao, carefully observing where he trod and pondering it thoroughly, which brought him its own sort of pleasure. After walking in this manner for about an hour, thanks to Shen Qiao having recovered 3/10 of his strength at this point, they were able to reach the mountain summit in quite good time. Our man, Yan Wushi, likes a good puzzle. He likes a good mystery. He's a problem solver indeed, but oh my. I think I have an idea of where this is going to end, but we'll see. Oh, look! Nice! Here we go. Oh, I'm liking the black and white contrast. I'm liking that with the blue. Also, Yan Wushi looking very distinguished there. Nice. The peaks of Xuandu Mountain stretched tall, and the summit was much colder than its foot. Quite a few Taoist halls and monasteries were visible, standing in tiers with white mist swirling about. It was cold and lonely, but it truly did have that Taoist sense of transcendence, of detachment from the mundane. Shen Qiao had grown up here, and he'd long ago become accustomed to this kind of scenery. Seeing it again now, he couldn't feel the slightest nostalgia nor affection. Instead, it settled in his chest like a stone, and he ached to release it with a sigh. Oh, that's so good. But he had no time to sigh. Making use of the forest cover, he took a shortcut and ran straight up to a 2-tiered building. Before nearing it, he stopped, squinting far into the distance, a little surprised. It was called Yuju Pavilion, and was the residence of successive generations of sect leaders. It had been Shen Qiao's residence, too. After he fell from the cliff, Yui took over Xuandu Mountain and became the acting sect leader. Xuandu Mountain's recent high-profile deeds seemed to make clear Yui's ambitions and aspirations. So Shen Qiao had been sure he'd moved into Yuju Province, or Pavilion. But when looking at it now, he saw the gates and windows of the monastery were tightly shut and there was no candle flame within. It seemed like nobody had taken up residence. Could it be that Yui wanted to wait until the Jade Terrace discussion? Did he want to make his title official before moving in? Shen Qiao mused over this for a moment. Since there was no one in Yuju Pavilion, he'd have to go to Yui's old place of residence and take a look. This thought had just formed when he saw the cloaked silhouette of a person carrying a candle, walking in the distance towards Yuju Pavilion. The silhouette's figure was familiar, but Shen Qiao's eyesight remained poor and he couldn't be certain. After only frowning and staring at it for a long moment did he conclude that the man was likely his Shidi Yui. Although it was a cold and clear night, all the nearby buildings were meant to support the sect leaders' ascetic training, so nobody wandered in among them unless their duties called for it. There was even a formation array protecting the area, so ordinary disciples couldn't enter. All this made it easy for Shen Qiao to get around. So it says here, extreme self-discipline of the body and mind was incredibly important to Taoists. For more on the ideals, see the glossary entry for Taoism. Okay. After thinking it over, he decided to move in closer and get a handle on the situation first. Lit by candlelight, Yui entered the Yuju Pavilion. Through a window, Shen Qiao watched as a room on the second floor was swiftly and faintly illuminated. It was exactly the room he'd once lived in. But Shen Qiao overestimated his ability and underestimated Yui's. He'd only crept a little closer when a voice rang out, "Which friend comes here uninvited?" This voice drifted over the distance of the direction of Yuju Pavilion and seemed to burst in Shen Qiao's ears. His ears buzzed and a muffled pain woke in his chest. Shen Qiao had to retreat 3 steps. He knew the effects were brought on by Yui, infusing his voice with internal energy. "Ooh! It's me, Yushidi," he said after steadying himself. Sure enough, there came a faint sound from within the Yuju Pavilion. He knew Yui could hear him, and the next moment a silhouette appeared before him. Sheng Zhao Shizhong. There was surprise in his voice, but also something Shen Qiao hadn't anticipated. Joy. By the looks of it, Yui hadn't expected his reappearance, but he had been greatly wishing for it. Yui here addresses Shen Qiao with the formal title sect leader, but appends the Shizhong suffix out of respect. Okay, well, interesting. Surprised and happy to see Shen Qiao. Let's see where that goes. Chapter 18, a falling out between brothers. Oh! Though Xuandu Mountain was the world's #1 Taoist sect, it had none of the internal feuding that outsiders would have guessed. From the time he was a child, Shen Qiao had grown up nestled in a peaceful, stable environment. His master was loving, both a teacher and a father to him. Shen Qiao's sect siblings regarded each other with deep fraternal affection, too. Most days they would all play around together in their free time. Even Qi Fengge wasn't as dignified or majestic in front of his other disciples as outsiders might have imagined. It was because the people around him all treated him with gentleness that Shen Qiao grew to be a gentle person. He entered the sect at an inopportune time, so he wasn't Qi Fengge's first disciple, nor was he a beloved final disciple. Of the 5 disciples Qi Fengge had accepted, Shen Qiao ranked second. This should have been an awkward position to occupy, but because of his character and talent and his tolerance and empathy when handling problems, he ended up Qi Fengge's most favored disciple. And so in the end, the position of sect leader passed to Shen Qiao. Yui ranked third, and was even 2 years older than him, but because he'd entered the sect later, he had to address Shen Qiao as Qizhong. As a child, he'd struggled with this for a long time. He'd often pester Shen Qiao, trying to provoke him into calling him Shizhong, but never succeeded. I wonder who the first was. That's being kept a mystery. Interesting. The 2 of them were close in age and had grown up playing together, so of course they were the closest to one another. If asked, Shen Qiao would say he entrusted his Shizun Shifenge and his martial siblings more than anyone else in the world. And, if asked which of his martial siblings he was closest with, he'd probably answer that it was Yui. Before he climbed the mountain, Shen Qiao had pictured their reunion. He thought perhaps that Yui would be astonished to see a dead man return alive, that he might even show some guilt or fear, or maybe his face would betray his disgust. Maybe Yui wouldn't even want to see him. But he hadn't expected anything like this joyful surprise. Even though Shen Qiao couldn't see his expression, he heard no lie in his Shidi's voice. There were a lot of things he'd planned to say, and they were all on the tip of his tongue, but he didn't even know where to start. Yui hadn't said anything more after calling out Zheng Zhao Shizhong, guessing that he was taking his time looking him over. Shen Qiao resorted to a rather prosaic conversation starter. Is everything well within the sect? There was no answer. Shen Qiao canted his head slightly and asked, San Shidi? What's wrong with your eyes? Yui's voice was very close. Instinct told Shen Qiao to back up, but a hand clasped him around the wrist. What's wrong with your eyes? Yui asked again. Shen Qiao only touched lightly on the matter with his answer. I fell from the cliff during my duel with Kunye. When I woke up, they were like this. The hand clutching his wrist didn't let go. Don't move, I'll examine your pulse. Shen Qiao wanted to tell him that there was no need, but he couldn't struggle free, so he let his Shidi do as he wished. Yui took his pulse with rapt attention. After a moment, he asked, You barely have any internal energy. What exactly happened? Calmly, Shen Qiao said, Isn't this what you expected when you poisoned me? For a moment, Yui's hand froze, and Shen Qiao took the opportunity to pull his own away. Yui's level of martial arts was such that his eyesight wasn't hampered no matter how dark the night or how feeble the candlelight. He looked over Shen Qiao with great focus. His Shizhong's face was a chilly white, and he'd become quite a bit thinner. It was evident that he'd suffered much hardship during this time outside the sect. His hand peeked out from the sleeve to hold a bamboo cane, and his hand was so scrawny and bony it made Yui shudder. Since you've returned, don't leave us again, Yui sighed. Let me explain this slowly, all right? Shen Qiao shook his head. Xuandu Mountain is about to choose a new sect leader. Won't it make things difficult for you if I'm here? An old character who's damaged Mount Xuandu's reputation? Confused, Yui said, Who said Xuandu Mountain is choosing a new sect leader? The Jade Terrace discussion is 10 days from now. Isn't it also a ceremony for Xuandu Mountain to announce their new sect leader? Yui was about to shake his head, then realized that Shen Qiao wouldn't see it if he did. Ever since you fell from the cliff and vanished, I've discreetly sent people out to search for you, he said. They looked everywhere, time and time again, but they still couldn't find you. To be declared living, there must be a person. To be declared dead, there must be a body. As long as you're still alive, Xuandu Mountain will never change sect leaders. I'm seeing to all our affairs on your behalf, but that's only as acting sect leader. I have no intention of overstepping my authority and replacing you. In the past, Shen Qiao believed whatever Yui said, but things had changed. Now he simply couldn't. He was silent for a moment. That day, during my duel with Kunye, I discovered that more than half of my internal energy was missing, and that my true chi had gone stagnant, the flow congested. I strained myself to keep going, but in the end it was for naught. I gave it careful thought at the time, but from the start I couldn't figure out when or where I'd been poisoned. I certainly never thought it could have been you. Yui hung his head and said nothing, but in his sleeve his hand was trembling imperceptibly. Yes, from childhood to adulthood, Shen Qiao had always trusted Yui unconditionally. He trusted everyone on Xuandu Mountain. It wasn't because Shen Qiao was foolish or ignorant or naive and gullible, but because he'd believed in them. He'd believed that there was always goodness in the world, believed people he'd known and experienced he'd been growing up with, and believed his martial siblings, inseparable as they were from himself, could never betray him. And that's why he hadn't guarded himself against them, and why he'd fallen so easily for Yui's scheme. Shen Qiao went on. I was unconscious after falling from the cliff. When I woke up, I'd lost my memory, and I spent all my days in a muddle, confused and disoriented. It was just recently that I recalled many of the details. The night before I fought Kunye, you came to me and asked if we could share a bed. There, we talked about all sorts of things. About the past, you even told me that you admired Zhao Shimei, but that, sadly, she was indifferent and cold to everyone. You were very distressed about this and told me I was the only one you could talk to. You said you hoped I could approach her for you after my duel with Kunye. Yui didn't respond. At first, when Kunye sent the challenge letter, I didn't want to accept, but then you brought up Shizun's old duel with Kunye's master, Huyulugu. You said that if I didn't agree, it might do harm to both Shizun and Xuandu Mountain's reputation. Then you started to make a show of professing your affections for Zhao Shimei whenever I was around. But the strange thing was, you never showed any hint of insuppressible yearning in front of Zhao Shimei herself. Not on your face or in your words. I didn't suspect anything at the time. I even went on comforting you and created opportunities for you to be alone with Zhao Shimei. But thinking back, none of that was real, was it? Yui finally sighed. No, it wasn't. I never carried a torch for Zhao Shimei. I only said that to confuse you, so you wouldn't pay attention to other things and your guard would be down. And also, so I'd have opportunities to speak with you alone before that final battle. You inherited Shizun's mantle, and your martial arts were the best among us martial siblings. A normal poison would be ineffective against you, so I had to use that rare and mystical poison, Joyful Reunion. It wasn't fatal immediately, and if the dosage is properly controlled, it's completely undetectable. Over time, the poison enters the bones, and the person looks like they've died a natural death. But I never wanted you to take your life, so I only used a tiny amount of Joyful Reunion. I only wanted you to lose the duel against Kunye. With your martial arts, I thought that even if you fell off the cliff, it wouldn't be enough to kill you. At most, I reckon you'd only suffered some serious injuries, and maybe you'd take a couple months to recuperate, but things went wrong. After you fell, I sent people to look for you right away, but no matter how hard we looked, we couldn't find you. Shen Qiao's frown grew even deeper. Joyful Reunion is incredibly rare. They say it's a poison that was brought to the Central Plains back when Zhang Qian traveled through the western regions. Then it was lost, and there's probably not even hidden away. It's probably not even hidden away in the Imperial Palace, let alone here at Xuandu Mountain. Where exactly did you get it from? Without waiting for Yui's answer, his expression suddenly shifted into one of surprise. Kunye! Did you get it from Kunye? Yes, said Yui. You colluded with the Gok Turks just to keep me from being sect leader? Finally, a faint trace of anger broke through on Shen Qiao's face. Shizun may have passed it on to me, but you know that I never sought out the position of sect leader, and all these years I relied so much on you to help me with the sect's internal affairs. If you'd said one word, I'd have happily yielded the seat to you, so I don't understand why did you need to go so far, even to the Gok Turks? The name of the poison is likely a reference to the poem where by the last emperor of the Southern Tang Dynasty, Li Yu, it lamented the bitterness of parting within his heart as he watched his country fall. His heart churned with emotion, his voice loud and harsh. After he spoke, he couldn't hold back a bout of coughing. Yui wanted to rub Shen Qiao's back and help him breathe, but as he reached out his hand, he paused. Finally, he withdrew it and said slowly, "Because Xuandu Mountain can't go on like this. Secluding ourselves and ignoring the outside world, we may be the world's #1 Taoist sect now, but eventually we'll lose that edge. Take a look around. In the Taoist sect's Chuyang Mountain Monastery at Qingcheng Mountain is rising to prominence, and its leader Yi Pichen is one of the world's top 10. He has an even stronger reputation than you do, Zhang Zhao Zhizhang. But ever since Shizun died, here at Xuandu's Violet Palace, we still just cling to his influence. Once you were as strong as Yi Pichen in martial arts. If you'd been willing to enter greater society, you could have been a contender for the spot of #1 in the world. But you chose solitude. You'd rather stay in obscurity, hidden away in these mountains. If we keep on like this, there's no matter how deep Xuandu's Mountain's prestige runs, eventually we'll all be replaced." At this point, Yui's tone became agitated and indignant. "The world is in utter chaos right now," he said. The Taoists erect separate denominations, while the Buddhists and Confucians are using all sorts of tricks just for the right to have their say, each lending their support to their chosen ruler for his ambitions in the Central Plains. Even the demonic sects have been meddling. Only Xuandu Mountain remains secluded and isolated, ears closed, unwilling to listen. We have the finest sword, yet refuse to wield it. If some Buddhist or Confucian-backed emperor unifies the land one day, will us Taoists still have a place to stand? His words slowed, and then, "Zhizhang, I've never wanted to take your place. I also know that those from different tribes will never understand each other. Working with the Gok Turks is just one part of my plan. If you were here, Zhejiang, you'd never have allowed me to do this. The only choice I had was to carry out that foolish plan so that you'd be gone. Now that you've returned, don't leave again. Stay here and recuperate properly, all right? And what will you do in 10 days? Said Shen Qiao. Yui startled. What? I've returned to Xuandu Mountain. How are you going to explain to our martial siblings and the other disciples? And 10 days later at the Jade Terrace discussion, how are you going to explain this to the public? For a moment, Yui couldn't respond. Shen Qiao asked again, what exactly are you working on with the Gok Turks? My apologies, said Yui, but I can't tell you yet. And what if I oppose your plans? Yui said nothing. If I oppose you, you'll detain me. And from now on, I'll be a sect leader in nothing but name, barred from seeing the light of day. That way I won't be a hinder to your grand plan, is that right? Only silence answered him. Shen Qiao sighed. You were sickly when you were young. And even though you were 2 years older than me, it was difficult to watch. Whenever you fell ill, you acted so spoiled. But after you grew up a bit, you were deeply afraid that the junior disciples would look down on you, finding you undignified. So you put on a stern and steady face day in and day out. Even now, I still remember you chasing after me, pestering me to call you Zhejiang. Yui's expression softened a little at the memory. Yes, I remember too. I was an ill-tempered child. I acted aloof around everyone. I was difficult and sarcastic. Even Zhao Shimei avoided me. Of all our martial siblings, you were the most good-natured. You were always the one who put up with me. Regardless of how good my nature is, I still have a line that cannot be crossed, said Shen Qiao. You wanted to be sect leader, so you plotted to make me lose to Kunye. I have nothing to say about that. I can only blame myself for being completely unguarded against you, for misjudging you. But the Gok Turks are hugely ambitious and have long coveted the great empire that lies within the Central Plains. Mount Xuandu has never sided with any country in their attempts at unification, but we'd never work with the Gok Turks. Yui forced a bitter smile. I just knew you'd say something like that. Otherwise, why would I have gone to such painstaking lengths? Perhaps the generations of sect leaders who set out our principles of seclusion were in the wrong. But they were right about not working with the Gok Turks. Turn back now. It's not too late. I've already made my decision and I will not turn back, Yui said angrily. I grew up here too. Of course I want to see it become even better. I care just as much as you do. So why do you have to put on such a holier-than-thou act? Do you think that in all the world you're the only person who's right, that everything else is wrong? Why not go and ask the other disciples in the sect? They might not say it, but deep down, why would they be unsatisfied with Mount Xuandu and how it's lain dormant all these years? After the Jade Terrace discussion, I can officially announce that the mountain will open up to accept disciples. Xuandu Mountain's reputation and status will flourish. I will never allow Tiantai's sect and Lichuan Academy to keep everything to themselves. Shen Qiao was silent for a long time. Yui panted, all vented out, his chest rising and falling. The night breeze blew by and neither had anything to say. Yui felt a faint ache begin in his heart. No matter what else happened, they could never return to the close relationship they used to share. At last, Shen Qiao said, Since you've already made up your mind, there's nothing more to say. Where are you going? Asked Yui. When Kunye defeated me, I brought shame to Xuandu Mountain, Shen Qiao said coolly. Even if others say nothing, I lack the face to be a sect leader. And as for the poisoning, I have no proof. Even if I testify before the public, they probably won't believe me. They'll only think I'm dissatisfied and spouting nonsense. You've already calculated everything, so why does it matter to you where I'm going? Wherever I go, I won't interfere with your grand endeavors. You're badly injured, Yui said softly. You have to stay and recuperate. Shen Qiao shook his head and turned to leave. But behind him came Yui's voice again with a chilly new air. I won't let you go. Oh, this is good. This is getting good, y'all. This is getting good. Yep. Chapter 19, Inquiry. And what if I insist on leaving, asked Shen Qiao. Instead of answering, Yui countered, this is where you grew up, and the martial siblings you grew up with are here. Can you really bear to abandon Xuandu Mountain to leave like this? Yui tried both reason and affection to move him. But Shen Qiao still said, if you're asking if I'll work with the Gok Turks, I will not. When he saw that he wouldn't budge, Yuai's tone grew even colder. What difference does it make if you agree or not? 4 of the 7 Xuandu Mountain elders are already in favor of my plan. The other 3 are in secluded cultivation and unconcerned with mundane affairs. As for our martial siblings, Da Zhizhong is too kind-hearted to take a side, so it's useless to talk to him. Si Shidi and Zhao Shimei will be very happy to see you again, but that doesn't mean they'll agree with you. It's imperative that we reform Xuandu Mountain. I won't watch our sect suffer a slow decline, not in my lifetime, and neither will they. I'm really liking that we're getting to these other disciples, so I guess that Da Zhizhong is the oldest. There's a little note about him. Most senior brother. Yep. Okay, so we got them. And then the other ones. Okay, the last disciple. Here we go. How else do you think I can manage to become acting sect leader and stabilize things so quickly? Could I have made all this happen alone without their tacit support and approval? You, Shizun. Even the older generations of sect leaders, your ideas aren't going to work anymore. How can Xuandu Mountain only focus on our moral purity when there's so much unrest in the world? Night was silent. Even the birds had disappeared completely from the sky. The wind had subsided. The leaves rustled no more. It was as all the world had come to a standstill. At some point, the bright moon had ducked behind the clouds, drowning the heaven and earth in darkness. The candle in Yuai's hand flickered, slowly growing fainter until it finally went out. Oh, I love this! Ever since Shen Qiao had gone blind, night and day made no difference to him. He was also a human being, felt pain when he was injured and brooded when he was troubled. But he'd always believed that hope lay ahead, and he was willing to face any obstacle with an optimistic mind. Though many doubts, heavy doubts, had waited in his heart after he recovered his memories, he didn't become disheartened or discouraged. He still wanted to go to Xuandu Mountain to get an explanation face to face. But at this moment, with the truth laid out in front of him, Shen Qiao felt a deep exhaustion rise up inside of him all at once. It was as if there was a hand clutching at him, trying to drag him down into the freezing sea. Involuntarily, he clenched the bamboo cane in his hand. When Yuai saw the expression on Shen Qiao's face, it did anguish him a bit. But at this point, he felt that there were some things he had to say clearly. Xizhong, nobody wants to wallow in solitude. Xuandu Mountain is clearly the world's #1 Taoist sect and has the strength to support an enlightened ruler who can help Taoism influence the world. So why must we act like hermits and hide ourselves away in the mountains? Everyone on Xuandu Mountain agrees except you. You're the one who's being too naive. Shen Qiao drew a deep breath. Kunye is one of the Gok Turks. By working with him, surely you don't intend to give the Gok Turks an inroad into the Central Plains. Of course not, said Yuai. As I said, working with Kunye is only one step of my plan. No matter how much I wish for Xuandu Mountain's return in the secular world, I would never side with the Gok Turks. The Gok Turks are ferocious and brutal, not enlightened rulers at all. Shen Qiao's brow pinched. He had a vague suspicion that Yuai had embroiled Xuandu Mountain in some sort of grand scheme, but with his mind in such disarray, he couldn't fathom what it was. Now that you've returned, we can go back to how it was before, Yuai said. No distance between us, close as brothers. Your eyes haven't recovered yet, and you still have internal injuries. Just climbing the mountain must have taken a lot of effort. How far can you manage it to get in such a state? Xuandu Mountain is your home. Shen Qiao slowly shook his head. You walk your bright and glorious path. I'll walk my lone wooden plank. I'd rather not be a figurehead sect leader, and from now on... He was about to say something callous about tearing his robe and breaking off relationships, but then scenes of their childhood flashed before his eyes. The two of them growing up together. Their friendship was still vivid in his mind. A few words claiming it was lost wouldn't be enough to truly dissolve their bond. Shen Qiao released a soundless sigh. In the end, he said nothing. He only pressed his lips tightly together and then turned and left. Of all the martial siblings under Qi Fengge's tutelage, Shen Qiao was the most talented. But with the top martial artist in the world as their master, the rest weren't too shabby either. Qi Fengge only accepted disciples who were naturally gifted, with excellent foundations. If Shen Qiao was at the height of his powers, then Yuai might not have been able to stop him. But Yuai didn't hesitate to move against him now. Without a second thought, he flashed right in front of Shen Qiao, blocking his way. Don't go, Xizhong, he said severely. He reached out, meaning to knock Shen Qiao unconscious. But Shen Qiao must have anticipated this move. He stepped back before Yuai reached him, raising his bamboo cane as if to parry. Of course, Yui didn't take Shen Qiao's defense seriously. He reached out to grab the bamboo cane. He was sure he'd catch it too, but somehow he came up empty-handed. The bamboo cane slipped away from his grasp, advancing instead of retreating, and struck at his wrist. Yui frowned minutely and flicked his fingers, reaching out to grab Shen Qiao's shoulder with the other hand. His sleeves rustled in the still air, and he moved behind Shen Qiao to block his path of retreat. Yui caught Shen Qiao square on the shoulder. He used a fair deal of force, and slight pain jolted through Shen Qiao at the contact. But he paid it no heed, and used the bamboo cane in his hand to strike out at Yui's waist. There was an old injury there from when Yui had fallen from a tree as a child. He'd suffered fractures, and although they later healed, the memory of pain left a small shadow in Yui's mind. He moved instinctively to avoid the hit. Shen Qiao had only recovered 3/10 of his strength and was no match for Yui. But the two of them had known each other since their youth, so despite his blindness, Shen Qiao still knew every possible move that Yui might make, every trick he might employ like the back of his own hand. Shen Qiao was also certain that Yui didn't want to kill him, so he attacked without the slightest misgiving. Of course, Yui knew Shen Qiao as well. They exchanged blows for a while, and Yui began to grow agitated. Not wanting to drag this out any further, he aimed a palm strike directly at Shen Qiao's shoulder, this time using true chi. The palm strike swept up a wind before it, and at the sound of it, Shen Qiao automatically raised his bamboo cane to block, but it was futile. The true chi came right at his chest, and with a snap, his bamboo cane broke in two. Shen Qiao stumbled back several steps, staggered twice, and then fell to the ground. Ah Chow, stop this. Oh, now we're on a first-name basis. Stop this and come home with me. Once Xiao Shimei and the others hear that you've returned, they'll be overjoyed. Yui took a couple steps forward, preparing to pull the other man up. Shen Qiao said nothing. Yui had just grasped him by the wrist, and then he saw something sweep towards him, as forceful as a tempest. It was the broken piece of bamboo cane that Shen Qiao had been holding. Shen Qiao had been saving up all of his power, holding it back, just waiting for his opponent to let his guard down. Yui hadn't thought that Shen Qiao, injured and blind as he was, would still have the strength for a counterattack. He didn't know that Shen Qiao was only at 3/10 of his usual strength. Yui didn't dare risk a direct hit when he saw how fiercely the bamboo cane moved. It came at him with power as frigid as an icy spring, cold enough to pierce to the marrow. He dodged to the side. Shen Qiao didn't press the attack. He withdrew his palm and turned, retreating back down the path straight ahead. Shen Qiao had grown up there, and he could still manage to distinguish his surroundings, even if he couldn't see them. Stepping lightly with his qigong, he rushed onwards with Yui in hot pursuit. Without looking back, Shen Qiao pinpointed Yui by sound and flung the broken piece of bamboo cane behind him. Determined to keep him at Xuandu Mountain, Yui was done holding back. With a furl of his sleeves, he flung the broken bamboo right back at Shen Qiao. Shen Qiao heard the sound of something whistling through the air from behind him, just as the bamboo cane grazed past his shoulder. It sliced through his clothes, and blood welled from the wound immediately. Shen Qiao chose to endure the pain. He kept going forward, not evading, and though he staggered a bit as he went. In the blink of an eye, Yui caught him up to him and lashed out with a palm strike. Shen Qiao had no time to dodge. The blow hit him square in the back. Blood gushed from his mouth as he fell face first to the ground. After that, all he could do was curl up and gasp for breath. "Stop running!" Yui reached down to yank him to his feet, truly angry now. "Why did you get so stubborn? I don't want to hurt you, so why won't you just listen?" Who wouldn't run when they know they're about to be held captive? Only a fool. A mocking laugh, cold and sinister, rang out from somewhere in the darkness. Alarmed, Yui stopped and looked around, yet found no trace of the other man. "What lonely scoundrel is hiding there? Come out!" I used to think that Chifeng's disciples had to be at least halfway decent, considering that he himself was the heavenly pride of his generation. Man, Yan Wushi had a big thing for Chifeng, didn't he? But who would have guessed? Shen Qiao being nearly crippled is one thing, but to think that Yui, the acting sect leader, is only mediocre in martial arts. If Chifeng hears about this in the netherworld, I fear it'll disturb his eternal rest. In the next moment, Yan Wushi appeared, ridicule and contempt written all over his face. Even with his martial arts, Yui couldn't tell where he'd come from or where he'd been hiding. He was terribly alarmed, but he kept his expression calm. "May I know this distinguished master's esteemed name?" he asked. For what important reason have you come to visit Xuandu Mountain in the middle of the night? If you are one of my master's old friends, I must ask you to come to the main hall for tea. Xuandu Mountain without Qifengge is far too dull. I have no need to drink your tea, and in any case, you're not qualified to drink tea with me. Oh my gosh! Ooh! Yui intended to bring Mount Xuandu into the secular world, so of course he'd done quite a bit of his homework. He searched his mind. Judging by how presumptuous and arrogant this man was, and how uncanny his martial arts were, Yui landed on a name. Yan Wushi. You're the demon lord Yan Wushi. Yan Wushi frowned. That title, demon lord. This venerable one quite dislikes it. Yui's face was grave. He skipped right past whatever Yan Wushi liked or disliked. Dare I ask what business sect leader Yan has on Xuandu Mountain? This humble Yu is currently dealing with the sect's internal affairs, so he's unable to offer proper hospitality. He asked sect leader Yan to visit again in the daytime. I can come whenever I want. Since when do you have the right to order me around? Yui had been startled by Yan Wushi's sudden appearance. Now that he had time to think about it carefully, it occurred to him that Xuandu Mountain wasn't a place someone could barge into at will. Even a grandmaster of martial arts like Yan Wushi or Ruyan Kuhei couldn't just enter whenever they wanted, as if they were strolling onto some empty, unguarded plot of land. The only possibility was he'd come via the narrow route that hugged the back mountain's cliff. He whipped around to look at Shen Qiao. Shen Qiao had his head slightly lowered, so Yui couldn't see his expression. Then he placed his hand on a nearby tree trunk and straining so as he could stand, using it for support. He looked as if a gust of wind would blow him over. But then the wind really did grow stronger, whipping at his robes until he rustled and flapped, and he simply stood there firmly rooted, as if even 100 calamities wouldn't be enough to break him. When Yui saw that Shen Qiao wasn't at all surprised by Yan Wushi's appearance, a possibility occurred to him, one that left him shocked and furious. Ah, Qiao, how could you get involved with people from the demonic sects? At that, Shen Qiao let out a slow breath that carried the scent of blood. He wiped the smears from the corner of his mouth and rasped, You've colluded with the Gok Turks, so why shouldn't I keep company with the people from the demonic sects? We're gonna call out your hypocrisy, and I'm gonna meet it halfway, bitch. Chapter 20. Enjoying the show. Oh my gosh. Last chapter, y'all. Shen Qiao's words rendered Yui temporarily speechless. And Yan Wushi just had to fan the flames. Qifengge let Hu Lugu walk away. Then Hu Lugu goes and takes a disciple who throws Qifengge's disciple off a cliff, he said nonchalant. Meanwhile, Qifengge accepted a disciple, but that disciple was so ambitious he colluded with the Gok Turks against his own Xizang to make himself sect leader. I reckon Qifengge would leap right out of his coffin if he caught wind of this down in the netherworld. He'd be furious. The taunting stoked Yui's anger. He barely managed to tamp it down as he coldly replied, It's rather impolite of sect leader Yan to arrive uninvited in the middle of the night. This Yu still has family matters that he must attend to, so forgive him for being unable to see you off. What a joke, said Yan Wushi. My venerable self will come and go as I wish. There's no place in the world that can stop me. If Qifengge tried that, my venerable self might leave some of his dignity intact, but you? Who do you think you are? Nobody had ever said anything like this to Yui in his life. He was hot-blooded as a youth, and it was only under Shen Qiao's subtle influence that he'd grown gentler over the years. Now, his old fiery temper was provoked and rekindling. His fingers twitched inside his sleeves. At first, he wanted to summon others to help him, but in the end, he thought better of it. Shen Qiao was popular on Xuandu Mountain with an excellent reputation. It was true that others approved of Yui's proposal and shared the hope that Xuandu Mountain could enter the secular world anew and participate in the contest of reunification by supporting a ruler. But that didn't mean they wanted their leadership to change. Not to mention, there was a decent chance the elders and martial siblings would soften at the sight of Shen Qiao, given the way he looked at the moment. They might just change their minds. If that happened, the situation could spiral into chaos. Considering that, he shook out his sleeve. A long sword appeared in his hand. I love they're just hiding these swords up in their sleeves, like you do. This was one of the 3 swords Qifengge had passed down to his disciples. Shanhei Tangbei he gave to Shen Qiao. His youngest female disciple, Gu Hingbo, received the sword Tianwan Sheishun, and the 3rd sword, Junzi Buchi, was the one that Yui held now. A swing of the sword shot rainbowed ribbons of brilliant, billowing light into the dark, dazzling but uncanny. Only one who'd honed Xuandu Mountain's azure waves sword technique to its ultimate level could create such a sword glare. Beam after beam came in great swells that built momentum relentlessly until they arrived like a tempest, powerful and wrathful enough to swallow heaven and earth. In the eye of that storm, his opponent would feel like a deluge was pouring down around him, the raindrops violently crashing down until they seemed on the verge of shattering the ground itself. A frigid, sweeping gale sliced through the air like knives, filling all with terror as the blades slashed through bones and speared into bowels. At some point, Wushi had risen up into the air. At first glance, it looked like he'd been blown back by the raging winds, his feet floating off the ground. He'd kept one hand behind his back, the other held out flat before him, palm first. With a furl and a flick of his sleeve, he first swept away most of the barrage of sword rain, then extended a single index finger. It was the same finger he used against Yu Xingyang beneath the cliff at Bamboo Peak. The difference was, against Yu Xingyang, he'd only used half his strength. Now, he was using 8 parts out of 10. So, reference to the famous poem about star-crossed lovers by Nalang Jingde of the Qing dynasty. The translation is "For whom does spring come?" And then from the Lu, the collection of Confucius teachings, the translation, "A true gentleman is unlike a tool. Tools cannot be considered their actions and serve a narrow purpose." So Confucius told his students that a junji must be a broad-minded and thoughtful, tolerant and flexible, instead of rigidly fixating on tenets. The sword glare that had blotted out the heavens condensed. The tip of Yuai's sword twirled once in a ring of light, then dove to meet Wushi's finger. The two torrents of true chi met at their point and exploded, the blast radiating out around them. In the center, their wide sleeves whipped and unfurled. Outside the circle, things were worse. Shen Qiao had to dodge to the side when Yuai and Wushi attacked each other, but that wasn't enough to avoid the shockwave. He almost lost his balance when the impact came. The sword's point was infused with true chi, and it created a turbulent upsurge. Like a massive rushing wave, it broke and crashed over Wushi's head. The azure wave sword technique was true to its name. Chi Fengge came up with this technique while overlooking the great sea to the east. Over the years, he'd made some improvements to it, and eventually it became the introductory martial arts practiced by all Mount Xuandu disciples. But even though it was introductory, the distinction between superior and inferior martial artists became apparent when they practiced the same sword technique. Such was the case with Yuai. He'd attained the level where authentic understanding of the spirit surpasses rigid mimicry of the form, and had integrated much of his own understanding and swordplay into the azure wave sword technique. He'd achieved true, perfect command of it. He and his sword were nearly one and the same. Yet his attack was thwarted by one single finger of Wushi's hand. Oh my gosh, look at that! Oh, I love it. Okay, so we get to see, there's the little yin and yang on UI. Oh my gosh. Bitch, I love it. I love it. Yes. Wow. Close observation would reveal that Wushi's finger was still not, nor simply, pressed against the point of the blade. To the contrary, he was moving incredibly fast, too fast to be seen. So while it looked like he was motionless, in truth his hand had never stopped moving. His finger darted as if it could see precisely where to go. It lightly grazed several spots, and each just happened to be the weakest point in Yuai's barrier of true chi. Just then Yuai remembered the review of the world's top martial art experts, and that his master Chi Fengge had given them when he was still alive. Wushi was mentioned in that lesson. Back then everyone thought that Chi Fengge's greatest rival was the Gokturk master Hulugu, but Chi Fengge said that Wushi's talents would see him surpass Hulugu within a few years. He might even be capable of defeating Chi Fengge himself. He'd seen that Wushi's martial arts had already progressed past the point of strict adherence to set forms. It changed as it pleased him to change. For most people, the Zhiyong strategy was the key to deepening their martial arts as they strove towards the pinnacle of martial prowess. But for Wushi, it was just a point of reference. Instead of emulating the Zhiyong strategy, instead of recultivating his chi from scratch, he simply used it to patch up the deficiencies in his own martial art abilities. Wushi's martial arts included the infamous spring waters finger technique. After they fought, Chi Fengge used 2 lines of poetry to describe it. The spring waters ripple, my reflection embraced, my wishful fancies crumble, only ash remains. When Yui heard these lines, he couldn't grasp their meaning. They deemed to be about a woman lamenting her long-faded feelings. Oh my God, they did have a thing! But he finally understood what the second line meant. Because accompanying his opponent's finger technique was a towering tide of true chi. Not only did it block his attack, it nearly collapsed the barrier that Yui had painstakingly constructed using the chi from his sword. The feeling of it, the pressure, was exactly as Chifunge had described. His wishful fancies had crumbled, and now only ash remained. Yui was forced to push the transmission of his sword chi to its limits. But just a few moments later, his attack went up like an explosion of smoke and haze, its dense vapor suspended in the air. Wind burst forth from nowhere, and giant boulders split in a thunderous roar. A whining buzz filled Shen Qiao's ears. For a moment he couldn't hear anything else. On such a silent night, the explosion's roar alarmed the other people on Xuandu Mountain. Lamplights flickered to life in the distance, one by one, and quite a few people threw on their clothes and headed for the source of the commotion. Things had progressed far beyond what Yui had anticipated. He wanted to finish this fight quickly and quietly, but he hadn't accounted for Wushi interfering. The situation had slipped out of his control. Both of them ceased their attacks, and Yui backed up 3 steps, while Wushi backed up 2. But Yui had gone all out in their fight, while Wushi had only used 8 parts of his strength. Everybody knew who was going to come out on top. Despite everything, Wushi remained composed. He had a look on his face like he was greatly entertained. Yui gritted his teeth and didn't speak. Part of him welcomed the others, since the combined strength of several elders would surely be enough to detain that trespassing madman Wushi, and that in turn would keep Shen Qiao from leaving. But another part of him didn't want anyone else from Xuandu Mountain to see Shen Qiao. He was still thinking it over when the first person arrived. It was Chifunge's first disciple, Tan Yanxun. He was the Shizhong of Shen Qiao and Yui. His abilities were only average and his temperament mild, a peacemaker when faced with conflict, a bleeding heart who couldn't afford to offend anyone. His disposition and martial ability made him unsuited for sect leader, but his forgiving and charitable nature earned him the deep respect of all his martial siblings, Shen Qiao included. After Shen Qiao became sect leader, Tan Yanxun was made an elder and busied himself every day with the education of the next generation of disciples. Yushidi? Tan Yanxun found Yui with a single glance, looking rather surprised. That sound just now was from you, and who's this? Huan Yu's sect leader Yan, said Yui. When he heard Yui's offhand introduction, Tan Yanxun drew in a cold gasp. Why was the demonic lord of the demonic sects here? Wushi was in a good mood. He even took the initiative to greet Tan Yanxun. You're Chifunge's first disciple. Years ago, I fought your master and lost to him, but now his disciples are all completely useless. Would you like to have a try too? Tan Yanxun was speechless. Wushi turned to look at Yui, who said severely, Sect leader Yan might be peerless in his martial arts, but Xuandu Mountain's numbers are still enough to keep one man here. Does sect leader Yan find Xuandu's mountain scenery so spectacular that he couldn't bear to go? Wushi sneered a bit. Xuandu Mountain without Chifunge is utterly worthless, in my eyes. He looked at Shen Qiao and spoke with ridicule. Still unwilling to leave? Are you waiting for your Shidi to imprison you so the two of you can chat about your friendship? Only then did Tan Yanxun notice the other person was there, standing beneath a nearby tree. He'd failed to notice the other person. He was half concealed in the shadows, his breathing very faint, and Wushi had caught his attention by speaking first. Just one glance shocked him. Zheng Xiao Shidi, he blurted out. Shen Qiao, supporting himself with the tree trunk, nodded in the direction of his voice. Has Da Shizhong been well? Tan Yanxun was surprised and delighted. Taking a couple steps forward, he asked, Are you all right? When did you return? How did you? Yui stopped him. Da Xiang! Cut off. Tan Yanxun remembered that Wushi had just what he had just said. Tan Yanxun whipped around to face Yui. What exactly is going on here? It was Shen Qiao who answered, Da Shizhong, is it true that you're planning to elect Yu Shidi as the new sect leader? Tan Yanxun appeared troubled. He looked at Yui and then back at Shen Qiao. He wasn't good at finding the diplomatic thing to say, so he went with the truth. While you were gone, we've relied on Yu Shidi to handle our internal affairs. After all, he's assisted you with everything before, so he's the only one who understands Mount Xuandu's workings from top to bottom. After you fell from the cliff, several elders held a discussion and decided to let Yushidi take over as acting sect leader first until... Well, it's good that you're back. Recuperate now and the rest can be discussed afterwards. There'll be plenty of time for that. Shen Qiao understood very well that if he truly remained here today, he would never hold the position of sect leader again. Not with the loss to Kunye, even with his own grievous injuries on top of that. Even if the others didn't object, he himself wouldn't have the face to take up the title again. Xuandu's Violet Palace would remain in the hands of UI, and regardless of whether or not Shen Qiao stuck around, he wouldn't be able to stop him from working with the Gok Turks. In fact, in his current condition, he'd only be placing himself at the mercy of others. Knowing this drew a silent sigh from him. All his hesitation was gone. This Shen asked sect leader Yan to bring him away with you. Ah, Qiao, Shi! Both of them spoke at the same time, UI with anger. Tan Yanqun with shock. He didn't understand when Shen Qiao could have gotten when he could have gotten involved with people from the demonic sects. Yan Wushi raised an eyebrow. He seemed unsurprised by Shen Qiao's decision. In fact, he looked like he found it exceptionally amusing. It's not too late for you to turn back, he said deliberately. Indistinct lamplight glowed in the distance. Moving closer and closer, the Xuandu Mountain disciples were running towards them one after another. A blind man's ears were extraordinarily sensitive. Although Shen Qiao could see a little, he could hear them approaching. He shook his head no. When he saw Yan Wushi preparing to leave with Shen Qiao, UI was furious and appalled. He raised his sword, moving to stop them. Oh, wait! Yan Wushi neither dodged nor avoided. Instead, he grabbed Shen Qiao by the lower back and shoved him forward, making him the target of UI's attack in an instant. Tan Yanqun was horrified. Oh, Sanshini, stop! Alarmed, UI quickly withdrew his attack and backed away. Yan Wushi bellowed with laughter. Then in the blink of an eye, he and Shen Qiao disappeared without a trace. Only the sound of his laughter remained, echoing in the emptiness. UI exploded with rage. That shameless madman! This was a great spot to end on, wasn't it? There is a part of me that wishes I could just keep reading. There's a part of me that wishes I could just keep reading, but then I'm like, as I'm getting my second glass of tea with honey, I'm like, no, I think my voice needs to rest after these because these are long reads. You're like, I feel like MXTX, like the text like just goes pretty fast. This one is a wordy story, so you gotta like invest yourself. But I was really, really happy with this set of chapters because this felt like, not to take away from Qinggong. I liked Qinggong last week. I loved the focus on him. That was a lot of fun, but I have been waiting for Yan Wushi and for Shen Qiao to have chapters together and to get to this whole part with UI. I have been waiting and we're finally here and that's so exciting. So this was a great set as my dogs were asleep throughout the whole reading, so now I've woken up and are like, throw me the toy. This was a great set of chapters. I loved this. I love that we finally got to UI. I loved how it was. I love we got into Shen Qiao. We got into Yan Wushi. We got into UI, which is fun. And we got some extra little things that we didn't really get to touch upon in the Donghua, which is really nice. So Whiteboard Kun is here to kind of chronicle that as it would be. So we're gonna do that. But yeah, again, we've talked about this in the Donghua, but Yan Wushi is just bound and determined. I feel like Yan Wushi, at this point, don't spoil things, because we're probably going to get into that later on, but I'm going to put my head canons out there. I feel as if Yan Wushi, we're going to put him up here, I feel like him and Chi Fengge, I feel like they had this kind of like, not really rivals, because the way that the novel describes it, like, Yan Wushi was beaten in combat by Chi Fengge, but they both recognized each other as like kind of on a similar level. But I feel like Chi Fengge was sort of this like revered older man, and it'll make sense when I'm explaining it here in a hot second. And then Yan Wushi was like the young challenger. And I feel like both of them kind of got something out of that, you know, whether or not they had feelings or not for each other. Yan Wushi all but says that he really, really, really valued Chi Fengge's position and opinions and prowess and ability. It kind of almost seems like Yan Wushi wants this, like, older, powerful man and the young challenger that can meet him and be rivals. It almost seems like Yang Wuxi is trying to recreate that, but with Shen Qiao being what he once was and he being what Qi Fengge once was, but the personalities and moralities are flipped, is kind of the vibe that you get from their encounters and what Yang Wuxi wants. But there's also, in the same vein, there's a couple things about Yang Wuxi. There is the idea that he is kind of making it seem like he is wanting to use Shen Qiao to learn the other volumes, the last 3 of the celerity, even though he's had access to one, right? Which he's not talking to Shen Qiao about yet. We'll see where that goes. But it seems like he's wanting to use him. But then there is the fact of also wanting to like heal him for the, this up here. For that. And then deep down way inside, even though he's not going to admit it and the novel doesn't want us to think it, there is the concept that Yang Wuxi is fascinated and curious about Shen Qiao, which is kind of a cool thing because Shen Qiao is very by the book, following Qi Fengge's like moralities and his like viewpoints of the world like to a T. I do like the idea that Shen Qiao, as we're seeing in this, is forming his own opinions about things. He has his own autonomy, but he very much believes in the same practices of his master to a fault where he gets onto UI about it later on. But I feel like Yang Wuxi is trying to explore that more, like how is this tied to Qi Fengge, and like he was so powerful and you're clearly on the up and up to rival him, like does that have something to do with your philosophy? But also Yang Wuxi likes a challenge, he likes a puzzle, and trying to figure out Shen Qiao is sort of his puzzle, but he also is trying to convince Shen Qiao to go to the dark side, and so he has this mystery of what makes Shen Qiao so like morally pristine. So there's a lot going on with Yang Wuxi's character, even though they don't give us a lot to work with him in this chapter set. Meanwhile, and plus the actions that he takes against Shen Qiao on the surface seem like they're harming him, but we, the audience, know that there is like an underlying, like it's actually helping him. The big question is, how much does Yang Wuxi know he's helping Shen Qiao, and how much is it just coincidentally happening that way? That's the question, and we, the audience, are kind of left not exactly sure of what it is, right? Also, it has become very clear to me the Donghua was playing up the BL aspects of this series so much. Like, the Donghua was making them, like, have heart eyes towards each other. Meanwhile, the novel's like, not yet. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. We've gone from acquaintances to enemies to now back to acquaintances that are curious about each other. It's a very realistic courtship novel, as you know. But yeah, I also like the fact that whenever Shen Qiao like gets these, I really appreciate the novel in comparison to the Donghua with going into detail about Shen Qiao's internal monologue and what he experiences when the celerity gets, the Zhu Yang strategy gets activated within him. That's really nice because the Donghua can only do so much as a visual metaphor, a visual medium, without showing you the inner monologues and taking the time to do so. So I feel like because of the time it had, it cut some of that out. And here in the novel, we're seeing it all portrayed in a much more fluid and cohesive way, which I appreciate very much as a reader. And the writing's so good in this. The writing is really good around this. So we find out, as they explain in chapter 15, we find out that we have the 5 volumes of the celerity. We do get some clarification that the one, what does he say here? He says the volume of lost soul. So the one that's on Mount Xuandu was the lost soul. We got that one. And that's the one that Shen Qiao had studied and that Yang Wuxi wants. That's a really cool addition, is that Yang Wuxi wants the celerity volume. He's like, I feel like he wants it to destroy it. He doesn't want other people to get access to it. So I feel like he wants to find the lost soul one to get rid of it. But also, it's kind of interesting because the lost soul being on Xuandu Mountain, it's isolated. And then you tied to Shen Qiao, who's kind of this wandering soul at the beginning, seems interested. Then we have the one that was at the temple, which is deluded thought. And deluded thought, we now know, has been accessed by not only Shen Qiao, but Yang Wuxi vicariously as well. So he says your body lacked it. He talks about finding one, the volume of diluted thought. He says the volume of diluted thought, I destroyed the original at the temple. Da, 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 da. And then he said, he talks about having access to one of his own volumes. What does he say there? He says, I was like, the contents of the volume, they're present in order. He says he found the one at Zhou. I wanted to see where exactly he said he had found the one at Zhou before. Because he was talking about getting it previously. He passed it down to you, so you had me recite the scroll. Otherwise, he's like, because he figured out, because he didn't immediately die after his battle with Kunye, he's like, oh, you must have been reading the Zhuyang strategy guide that Chi Fengge gave you. He's like, that's interesting. So he's like, I destroyed it. There's a mix of falsehoods. So he basically talks about how he deliberately destroyed it as well because it's going to make it even harder for people to trace it back, right? It's going to make it even harder for that to work. I wanted to find where he said if the one that he had named, he said he had found one at the Zhou temple. I'm pretty sure. I think he talked about that. I can't exactly remember where he said it, but anyway. So he's had the third volume. Yang Wuxi has found it, and he's good too. We know that Abbott has also found part of it as well. I'm sure that I read it earlier, but y'all know that it's been talked about. So yeah, I do think the fact of Shen Qiao like coughing up blood on his hand is actually hilarious, because I just love the fact that Yang Wuxi, whenever he's like, you know, you used to call me Shizun before. Why'd you change so quickly? And then Shen Qiao's like, bleh. Which Shen Qiao does not call him Shizun again. So there's that. Which, because he's, you know, remembers now. And I think that was another sign that he gained his memories back, that Yang Wuxi realizes it. When he didn't call him Shizun anymore, he's like, oh, you remember, don't you? Mm-hmm. And I think Yang Wuxi, he likes to flirt with Shen Qiao just enough to aggravate him, because he doesn't. Here's what I'm looking forward to. Right now, Yang Wuxi does not think that Shen Qiao, if Yang Wuxi likes Shen Qiao even a tiny bit, I don't think he believes that Shen Qiao likes him back. So he thinks the flirting is all, you know, no risk now. He's like, well, I can just flirt, you know, with you and it doesn't mean anything. I'm going to look forward to when Shen Qiao kind of admits some things and Yang Wuxi's like, I don't want to, why are we making this go further? I think when the reality hits Yang Wuxi about how he feels about Shen Qiao, then it's going to be interesting to see. Because right now he plays it off, you know, pretty well. So yeah, anyway, okay, there we go. I was looking at the wrong place. So they go to this inn, and of course Yang Wuxi, I love that he's like, how difficult this is. Why are you still alive? You know, why can't you just die? Like, Yang Wuxi grumbling about it is so funny to me. I love it. He's like, you know, he says here that, you know, the attendants, he says, Qinggong, they've come to look for him. You know, he put you square in the sights of the sycophant. You know, it's not too late to kill him. And he's like, nah, I'm not going to do that. And he thanks him. And I like that Yang Wuxi's like, don't thank me. He's like, you know, I wanted to force you to use the Zhuyang strategy. And he's like, sure, Jan. Sure, absolutely. Okay, so he said that your sect has the Zhuyang strategy lost soul tucked away somewhere. I need to find it. Okay, then he said that I've already cultivated with the scroll in the inner palace of Northern Zhao. So he didn't say exactly what the inner palace of Northern Zhao was, just that he's had it. So we're going to put that up here. Whatever that means. We don't get the title of it. I'm sure we talked about the titles last week, but the three guides, we don't know which one is which at this point. So yeah. And so in any case, they talk about what to do. And Yang Wuxi is like, you know, we're going to go back to Mount Xuandu so you can lead me to the scroll. Which, here's the thing. Unless Yang Wuxi went and found the scroll while Shen Qiao was having the discussion with UI, then what was the point of going there? Was it really to find the scroll? Or did you want to lead Shen Qiao back to UI so he could have closure, since you knew he remembered everything and wanted to get closure so he could leave? I'm just saying. He's like, I want to find the mysterious scroll in Xuandu Mountain, but the moment he gets there, he disappears. So unless he went and found the scroll on his own, which he very well could have, we could find that out next episode that he has it, then why'd you take him there? Except to help your acquaintance to, settle affairs, gain closure, and realize he needed to leave Mount Jiandu and not try to go back. I mean, obviously, too, Yang Wuxi is trying to convince Shen Qiao to leave Mount Jiandu and join his sect and cultivate with him, intermingle them cheese. But it's like, knowing what we know about Yang Wuxi and even watching the Donghua, it's like, sure, yeah, you don't care at all about Shen Qiao and he means nothing to you, but yet you're following him around and making sure that he has closure and all these emotional stakes are kind of met for him. Sure, Jan. But yeah, And look, I think, honestly, as chapter 16 is titled Good and Evil, I think two things can be true at once. Yang Wuxi can be frank. He cannot totally care about Shen Qiao, but at the same time, he can be invested in him and be curious and be developing these feelings while also maintaining these, like, oh no, it's nothing. Like, two things can be true at once. Let's not forget that. If we're treating these characters as three-dimensional, then it can be quite complex. So, but anyway, I also like that when the story decides that it wants to move forward very quickly, it does. And so we get to the refugee part, which is a little different from the Donghua. In the Donghua, the girl dies. Like, the daughter dies in the Donghua, which, for once, the novel is not as grim as the Donghua, which was interesting. But maybe it'll come back and it'll be that way. Maybe later on we'll come back and the daughter will be dead, and we'll just get, a callback to that. But for now, the daughter doesn't die. The dad ends up getting knocked away, and the son, Shen Qiao, has this moment where at first he's like, no, I'm not going to give them my other piece of food because it's not going to help matters. But then when the kid, thanks him and does the selfless act, then Shen Qiao kind of buckles and he's like, fine, I'll give you the food. And the part that was so interesting to me about this particular chapter is that Yang Wuxi didn't have a snarky comeback to that. Like, in that moment, Shen Qiao offering to give the food, I know Yang Wuxi framed it as like, well, it'll do no good to call you out or whatever. But I do genuinely think that Yang Wuxi might have been, not moved, but I think he might have been like, yeah, I might have been tempted to do the same. Like, I'm sure he would deny it and people would be like, no, he wasn't thinking that. But I think it's interesting that Shen Qiao's selflessness leaves even Yang Wuxi kind of speechless or unable to have a comeback. His snark only goes so far with what Shen Qiao does here. So Shen Qiao learns all about what's been going on with the uprising of the 5 barbarians. Again, the number 5 is pretty relevant in this story so far. We have 5 volumes of the celerity. We have 5 uprisings that have happened with the uprising of the 5 barbarians that have caused these things. And then Qi Fengge has 5 disciples. So that's interesting. Number 5 has come up quite frequently in this section. So yeah, I do like that we get this idea that Northern Zhou... So Shen Qiao asks, thinking that, do you believe Northern Zhou has the best chance of unifying the lands? And Yang Wuxi is not going to be like, Yang Wuxi's like, look, I understand that most of these dignitaries, most of the emperors are all the same. It's just exchanging power, whatever. So I think that it's interesting to know that Shen Qiao is trying to figure out where Yang Wuxi stands politically. And he's like, so you are kind of pushing for Northern Zhou. And Yang Wuxi says, well, I'm kind of like looking here at Yu and Yang. He's like, Yu and Yang, for example, is very hawkish and very quick to kill. So he has like a very quick mindset about that, but he's not inclined to favor any particular side. And thus he's left with few choices. And he's like, I need his assistance to unite the demonic sects. So he's like, because he's kind of neutral, he's a very likely ally that he would want to seek out to help him. And he's also trying to avoid choosing sides when it comes to Buddhism or when it comes to Taoism, and then also Confucianism. He's like, he's kind of avoiding all of these. And I kind of get the idea, because as this chapter set goes on, it's kind of like whatever particular like form, whether it's Buddhism, Taoism, or Confucianism you're favoring, kind of has political ties to different sects. And so if you just say, if you're just like, I'm going to be neutral and avoid all of them, then yeah, you don't get a lot of choices, which is why Wushi's like, that's when I come in and be a likely choice of being an ally. But also, you kind of, it puts them in a good position to kind of negotiate with, because they don't have certain people they're biased towards or against. So that's interesting. He's like, if Yuan became emperor, they probably wouldn't do any worse than the Southern Qin. So yeah, he's kind of like, he can't be any worse than the guy we got, but he'll help me out. So that's kind of why I want him in power, And then we don't really get what the Gok Turks are supporting in this, chapter set, except they're going to come in and try to take over the Central Plains, which Shen Qiao is very much against. So he's like, if Abbot Zhu Ting, he came from Tiantai and was the brother of Fei Yi, the current leader. So they favor Southern Qin. So the whole matter has a lot of political complications. So he's like, he was a supporter at once of Northern Zhou, but see, now he supported the old regent Yuan Hu, but not the current one, Yuan Yang. So the abbot is kind of interesting. We get the idea that the abbot does not like Yuan Yang. Doesn't like him. So instead, he is trying to restore his place to its former glory, but he can't do that as long as Northern Zhou is in charge. So he's trying to support Southern Qin. So it's creating this distinct political battle lines from the start of this chapter set, like basically painting that the abbot is going to be our enemy because he and Yang Wushi are in contrast with their goals, right? So it's kind of painting us with that, And so they're walking through the city. And I kind of like that as they walk through the city and they meet the refugees and get to the inn where they have the tea later on, that they sort of kind of start to... The chapter 16 has them kind of starting to become more acquainted and Shen Qiao kind of respecting him and what Yang Wushi knows and all of that. But then they kind of get in a little spat, like a little lover spat, about the morality of giving the kid the bread. And so then they kind of just like, they have a little tussle and they're like not talking to each other. And then the kid comes and Shen Qiao gives him the bread again. And then he's like, the flatbread had been worth the exchange for that little shred of goodwill. There was a lot of malice in the world, but he refused to let that quash his belief in kindness and benevolence. I'm very much looking forward to Yan Wushi, this man that believes that everyone is born evil and has only bad things in mind, learning from Shen Qiao that that's not the case, and him slowly becoming like having his mindset opened by Shen Qiao. I'm looking forward to seeing it go on. But also Shen Qiao kind of realizing, maybe what Yang Wushi's point of view is. So, freaking chapters 17, 18, 19, and 20. Love them. Love them. They are some of my favorite chapters so far in this entire book. I love these chapters. I also love that in the Donghua, Yang Wushi is still as kind of like, flowery and diva-ish as ever. But I love the way that they develop Shen Qiao's perspective in these chapters, where we find out that Shen Qiao has gained his memories back. So we find out that for sure. Shen Qiao has his memories. So we're going to put that here, has memories. But not only that Shen Qiao has like been slowly getting a little bit more agitated by all of this. Because he's like, I've gained my memories back. What do you mean my sect is acting out of turn of what Shi Fengge has wanted and has been decreeing all this time that we've been upkeeping? What do you mean that UI is taking over and hasn't, consulted anybody about it and is going against the beliefs that we've always had? What do you mean that this is happening? What do you mean they're taking political sides? What do you mean this is going on? Like, Shen Qiao has seen the effects of that and he's like, we shouldn't do that. And so Yang Wushi's like, well, what are you going to do about it? And he's like, well, I'm going to go and talk to him and you can come with me. We'll go to Mount Xuandu. I know a secret way to get there. And I love the point where as he's eating the candied lotus and then he looks at Shen Qiao and he's like, you've remembered everything. That was just such a good scene. And then Shen Qiao admitting all of it, being like, yep, what does UI think he's doing? And I just like that Yang Wushi's kind of like, I like that Yang Wushi challenges him, but it's more of him being curious because he's like, is that what Shi Fengge taught you, to cower in your shell like a turtle? He's like, he's like, from what I see, UI is acting with a clearer mind. And it's not him telling Shen Qiao that he's wrong, but he's saying, from the outside perspective, this seems like it's a good thing. So why is it not? Enlighten me. Like, I just love this idea that these two challenge each other without arguing or yelling or just agreeing without reason. They both challenge each other and want to know what the other thinks and why they're doing that. Even though Yang Wushi is very abrasive and arrogant, he still kind of wants to know. He's like, what do you mean? Why would you choose this? What's going on? Like, he's curious as to Shen Qiao's thoughts. He's like, and Shen Qiao is like, I'm not going to have this debate with you. I just want to go find UI and talk to him personally. Do you want to come with me, or do you want to wait at the foot of the mountain? And for Shen Qiao to say that to Yang Wushi, because Yang Wushi has pretty much threatened him a lot of this way, for Shen Qiao to be like, are you coming with me, or are you staying here? And Yang Wushi's like, excuse me, do you know who I am? You're not going to tell me to stay here. He's like, I do it. Yang Wushi is the definition of Cartman from South Park being like, I do what I want. Like, he's like, I'm just going to do whatever I want. You're not going to like, I love that he says, just like as if he was ordering an extra bowl of rice. He's like, well, go on, ask. Go ask UI. I'm coming too, but do what you got to do. And then I love that as he's saying, like, well, you know what, go ask him, whatever. And as he's stroking the edge of his plate, the green beans stack themselves and stand up. Like, he uses this very powerful move on something very nonchalant. To me, that signifies how comfortable he is around Shen Qiao at this point, but also that he's kind of like, can you make it up there by yourself? Like, he's showing a little concern, despite being this, all-powerful man who doesn't care about anything. And he's like, well, yeah, there's a path. And at this point, when Shen Qiao talks about the path that's the secret way in, he's just like, he was asking for his own amusement, but then he was like, now the secret path I'm very interested in, because I want to take notes and figure out how to get in and out of the Xuandu Mountain sect without anybody noticing me. So it could be that if Shen Qiao does not get the celerity from Xuandu Mountain this first time around, he would be able to sneak back in because he's followed Shen Qiao there through the secret route. Now, if that were the case, and if UI was smart, they would alter the array formation, so if he tried to come back again, it would work. But I don't know if that's possible, or if they would even try to do that. I don't know. But they reached the summit, and then I really like that picture of both of them walking up. I really like the picture of Yang Wushi versus UI. That's really good. And you know what? To the writer's credit, if I had not seen the Donghua, if I had not watched the Donghua, I would honestly have believed that UI was in fact overjoyed to see him, and I would not have suspected him at first, because the way that the author describes UI and their relationship and everything and how excited he is to see him at first, you wouldn't suspect that. It's only when Shen Qiao drops the second shoe and says, okay, but you poisoned me, and it's like, oh, in the Donghua, they went out of their way to make UI look as suspicious and ominous as possible from the get-go, just with the lighting, with the expressions, everything, that you kind of just knew he was, a villain from the start. But here in the book, it kind of slowly gets revealed. And UI, as the book says, was kind of tamed by Shen Qiao. He became gentler over time, and his flare-ups of anger weren't as noticeable. But then once, Shen Qiao's like, actually, never mind, I'm leaving, then he starts to let his original side of him show more and more and more. I really liked it. So chapter 18 is a falling out between brothers. I believe, in this humble Sheedy's opinion, I believe that Shen Qiao viewed UI as a legitimate platonic brother. I feel like he viewed UI as a brother. They were siblings. They were close friends. They were just bros, all that. I believe that UI had a little bit more of an attachment to Shen Qiao than just that. Because when he's talking about having a crush on the fifth disciple, and he's like, oh yeah, I was going to have you talk to her for me and everything, and Shen Qiao's like, but that seems pointless. He's like, you clearly don't like her that way. What are you talking about? That part was really funny. Where he's like, are you serious? No. He's like, I knew something was up. Yeah, that part was funny. And my dog wants me to rub her belly with my foot as I'm talking to you all. So yeah, and then Shen Qiao's like, look, y'all poisoned me, what's up? And he's like, let me explain. So we find out basically everything we find out in the Donghua of how this all went down. And Shen Qiao is just like, he's like, the poisoning I could accept. Working with the Gok Turks, could not accept that at all. Which then he kind of like flips onto UI. He's like, look, he's like, you worked with the Gok Turks and I found out about it. So me working with Yang Wushi, what's the difference? You clearly didn't have a problem working with them. So why is it a problem with me working with Yang Wushi? And it's like, I could see why UI would get very angry at Shen Qiao in this discussion that they have back and forth. Cause it's pretty great. He's like, thinking back on this, nothing was real. None of that was real, was it? And UI just like, the moment that Shen Qiao was like, you don't like women. UI is like, fine, let me explain. That was great. He's like, I didn't want to take your life. He's like, I just wanted to poison you a little bit. I just want to incapacitate you a little bit so that we can completely change the structure that you've associated with our sect and completely undermine everything that you've worked towards and upholding our master's regime. Nothing crazy. Right. And Shen Qiao's like, okay, well, that was clearly a bad idea. Okay. I really love that we see kind of a spectrum of Shen Qiao's, like, his personality in this chapter set. We see him go from like moments where he seems very feeble, like when he coughs up the blood and he's trying to reason out what the celerity is doing within him and all of that. We go through that, and then we have moments where he's very strong, like against UI. He stands his ground and he explains. He seems very in control of the situation despite having all this fragility. And then we see him like wrestling with trying to understand Yang Wushi, and we see him like wrestling with the good and bad of like the refugee situation, which I feel like the entire refugee situation was a social commentary. It was a social commentary about refugee situations in our own countries. It was a social commentary about how the administration just ignores it all. And I really liked the commentary about how people don't stay in power enough to do things, to get things done. And I'm kind of torn. I have kind of like a double-edged sword, because in my own country, usually most people in political power have like term limits or have a limit of power. Like our president, as of me recording this, can only have up to 2 terms, up to 8 years in office, and it switches to someone else. But there's a double-edged sword that always comes up with that, because on the one hand, I hear people say, well, when powers change every 8 years, because they often do, then it's like you've worked so hard to get something established, and then in 8 years, that other force tears it down and tries to start over again, and it creates this perpetual stagnating cycle of nothing getting done. But the opposite is, if you had someone in power for a long time and they were terrible, then that would be really bad. And so you wouldn't want that. So I like that this novel is kind of having this commentary about not only are the changes in power frequent and not giving enough time for change to matter, but at the same time, because they're so frequent, the people in power don't care. So they're not even trying to do good. They're just like, I'm in power for a while, I'm going to enjoy it while I can, and then move on to the next thing. And so I'm glad they made commentary about that, because it's something that should be brought up. But yeah. And so then UI is like, look, the Taoists erect separate denominations, while the Buddhists and Confucians are using all sorts of tricks just for the right to have their say. So we have the finest sword but refuse to wield it. If some Buddhist or Confucian-backed emperor unifies, where will we have a place to stand? And I think that that's what makes Shen Qiao the most frustrated, is that also establishes kind of a clear divide, whereas Yan Wushi is kind of, even though he's self-serving in what he's using Yu and Yang for, he also is very much open to this neutral stance on the power. He's like, I just want the power that's going to help me. I don't really care. But he's not trying to actively promote one over the other, right? Which I feel like Shen Qiao can kind of go, okay, as someone that values this sort of separation from the world, I appreciate that. Like, I feel like Shen Qiao connects to Yang Wushi in that belief, whereas UI is all about, we have to support Taoism or it's going to be taken from us. And that perspective is what Shen Qiao is not about, because he's like, once you pick a side, you've kind of doomed yourself into a corner. And he's like, why would you do that? Our master wouldn't promote that. And he's like, well, our master's been dead a while. And Shen Qiao's like, what? So that's kind of the impression that he gets. And meanwhile, UI has this grand plan that he can't explain. And I think that makes Shen Qiao mad too, because again, Yuan Wushi just talked to him and lectured with him about the concept of these regimes not knowing what they're doing and being self-serving and then leaving everyone behind to like in ruin. And here UI is kind of doing the same thing. He's starting to sound a lot like those people that Yuan Wushi was trash talking. He's like, oh, I got this plan. Don't worry about it. I mean, I can't tell you about it, but we've got concepts of a plan. And I'm like, sure you do. And how is this benefiting anybody else but yourself? At least Yuan Wushi, his self-serving is just to unite the demonic sects. It's not really putting people at risk yet. So I feel like the more UI talked in chapters 18 and 19 and 20, the more Shen Qiao was like, yeah, I don't want to stay here anymore. I don't like this anymore. And it was really cool to see Shen Qiao kind of go through these little levels of his personality. It was really neat. But also what's neat is the fact that even when UI was the most mad at Shen Qiao, even when he had wanted to stop Shen Qiao from advancing in whatever he was trying to do, and even when Shen Qiao was trying to resist UI when they were fighting with each other, their friendship that they've had their entire lives had prevented both of them from truly having this like murderous bloodlust. Like UI never got to a point where he truly wanted to kill Shen Qiao, and Shen Qiao didn't want to kill UI. They both have this camaraderie and friendship between one another that prevents them from truly looking at each other as an enemy. And I thought that was very interesting, right? But then Shen Qiao's like, look, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to stay here, because he's like, I can see you've got this plan already made up. I can see that the other disciples support you. I can see that me being here, the only thing I'm going to end up doing is being a puppet to you all and just be someone in name alone. You're going to do stuff without me. So I'm not the type of person to sit here and let you take advantage of me. So I'm just going to go. And then UI is like, oh, no, we need you to stay because we need your influence to help us. And we can't just let you go. And then that's when they start to battle each other, which Shen Qiao got hit by the bamboo stick and it cut into him, and then he had that palm strike hit him. So he clearly is not in a good place, and that's not good. So I wanted to get, there were 3 swords. We find out, I like that UI realizes who Yuan Wushi is, and he's like, I don't like being called the Demon Lord. Like, I'm glad Yuan Wushi says he doesn't like being called it. That's interesting. So we find out there are 5 disciples from Chi Fengge, and we find out that of the disciples of Chi Fengge, Shen Qiao is the number 2 one. 2, Yan Chun is number 1. 3 was UI. 4, we don't get we get the names on them. And then 5, the 5th one was the female disciple. So the 4th disciple, I don't think we get mention of him or who he is. We do get the swords. So the 3 swords, Gu Hingbo is the 5th disciple. Gu Hingbo. So these 3 get the 3 swords. So I guess 2 Yan Chun didn't need a sword. He already had other means of cultivation. And the unfortunate second middle child, they get the shaft every time. You've got your middle children, and then the second one to last is like, that's always the worst one out, right? But she has a sword called Junji Buchi. And then we have the swords. Shanhei Tongbei is Shanhei Tongbei, which is Woe for All, is the one that Shen Qiao has. And then UI gets the one that's called Tianwei Sheishun. Tianwei Sheichun. And that's the poems that we got before. The sword that UI has is about For Whom Does Spring Come, which is an interesting poem to associate with UI, because UI seems very impetuous. He also seems to have like the syndrome of, oh, I'm older than my peer, but my peer is more like, they're jealous of Shen Qiao in a way. And so they're just waiting for their moment, waiting for their time, which For Whom Does Spring Come seems to fit really well with. And then you have the other one that is a true gentleman is unlike a tool. Their actions serve a narrow purpose, so students have to be broad-minded and thoughtful. I wonder if the sword's really broad. That'd be kind of cool. But yeah, interesting. So it almost seems to say like that students must be broad-minded and thoughtful and flexible. So maybe she's open-minded. Or maybe she's not. Maybe she's the opposite. I guess we'll have to see. In any case, UI tried to convince Shen Qiao he was interested in her, and that clearly was a lie. So yeah, I also, every time I think of Wushi fighting UI with one finger, I think of Goku fighting Trunks in Dragon Ball Z. So, but it's worth noting that UI had, I love the way the novel describes the technique of this rainbow beam of light and it being like a tidal wave and like glass. It's so cool. But I love the fact that UI had mastered, maybe not perfected, but had mastered the technique from his mentor, and yet Wushi was able to battle it with a finger. Except instead of just, doing it haphazardly against his disciple, just on a whim, he did put some power into it. And that's interesting because we've not seen Wushi. He's used the shooting fingers technique. He doesn't seem to have a sword at this point in the story. He's just using his finger as a weapon. So that's going to be interesting. That's going to be interesting to see more of as we go in here. But yeah. And so Wushi faces off against UI. And then Shen Qiao notices everybody starting to get woke up on Mount Xuandu. And then Tan Yanchun shows up, Chi Fengge's first disciple. And Wushi just insults him to his face. He's like, oh, you all are useless. I was like, oh, God. Just insults him to his face. And I like how, they're like, why are you here? And then Shen Qiao's like, he's with me. And they're like, you're here. So it's a great scene. I love chapter 20. It's so freaking good. And Shen Qiao is like, this part here though, in the Donghua, it is Shen Qiao collapsing romantically into Wushi's arms. And he's like, take me away from here. And it's like, very sunset vibes, golden hour and all this. Here, it's nighttime. It's the middle of the night. And Shen Qiao's like, this Shen asks sect leader Yan to bring him away with you. He's like, just let me go. Take me away. Calgon, take me away. And Wushi's like, okay, it's not too late for, I like how he says, it's not too late for you to turn back. Are you, he's almost joking with him at this point. And Shen Qiao is like, no. And then he runs away with him. And then I love that I like that Tan Yanchun is terrified. He's like, what's happening? I just showed up and this demonic lord is taking our sect leader away. And UI is just like that shameless madman as he's laughing and cackling. I do love they kept that in the Donghua. I do love that. It's great. It's perfect. I love that Wushi's like, I'm getting what I want and I get to do whatever I want. I'm so happy about it. But the novel has made me consider a character with a lot more depth. In the last video, it was Chen Gong. In this one, it's UI. I mean, UI is still doing some horrible things and very dumb decisions and being kind of hypocritical around Shen Qiao, but in the other vein, you kind of also get where he's coming from. But Shen Qiao is a man of principles, damn it. And he's not just going to settle for that. So anyway, this was a great set of chapters. I'm super excited. Next week, I'm excited to hear your thoughts down below. And if I missed anything you want to talk about, please let me know down below. I know this is probably going to be like a 2-hour video at this point, but that's every week with us. I do want to say next week we're going to be getting into part 5. I didn't watch the audio drama. Hold on. I'm going to need to make it a point to just do the audio drama before starting the discussions. Because I almost forgot. Oh, no. That would have been horrible. A few things I do want to talk about before we round this up that are related to the audio drama. Someone on YouTube back a couple episodes ago asked me to do reactions to the audio drama. Having watched a few episodes of it, no. It's either I read the novel or I listen to the audio drama. They both are covering essentially the same content. So it would just be to do the extra editing and recording for it to be just me reacting to them saying what I've just read out loud to you. No, I don't really want to do that. So unless you all absolutely beg in droves, then that's just not going to happen. But I do really appreciate the audio drama because the voice actors that play Wushi and Shen Qiao are amazing and do a very good job. There are a couple little extra content edits that they did in the adaptation of the audio drama versus the novel. Shen Qiao apologizes to Wushi, saying, hey, I was warning you about I needed to spit out the blood. Sorry about that. When Shen Qiao asked Wushi why he didn't speak up about giving the bread to the kid. Yang Wushi is a lot more softer in his reply when he's talking about, not wasting his breath on fools. And I was like, It is nice to hear Yang Wushi's voice in context. That is kind of cool to hear because you can kind of feel the emotions come out a little bit more with him. The confrontation between Yang Wushi and UI is great in the audio drama. My favorite line is Yang Wushi says, "So this is your Shidi, a pot capable of only calling the kettle black." And I was like, ooh, the shade of it all. And then the last thing I want to talk with you all about is the poetry that Shi Fengge says about Yang Wushi, which made me go, oh, did you guys actually have something? I don't know about that, but the line in the audio drama, they translate it to how a heart filled to the brim with love becomes nothing but ash, which relates to his ability, the finger shooters. That to me is also talking about two other things. One, it's talking about the phoenix powers that he has. A heart filled to the brim with love becomes nothing but ash, like, his phoenix abilities, which is foreshadowing for him, using that and possibly being negatively affected by it later on in the story. But what it also is foreshadowing is that as he becomes more in love with Shen Qiao, that it's just, he feels like his heart filling to the brim with nothing but love will reduce it to ash. It'll be self-destructive for him. His love for Shen Qiao will self-destruct himself, which is kind of what happens by the end of the Donghua. And I'm really excited for that to all come back into play as we keep reading. So yeah, but y'all, I really had a lot of fun. This has been my favorite set of chapters yet to go through, even though it was not much different than the Donghua. It was still really cool to see the insights into Shen Qiao's character, more into Yang Wushi, etc. But Yang Wushi's like, "Are you sure you want to go off with me into the sunset?" And Shen Qiao's like, "Yes." And he's like, "Don't say I didn't warn you." So we're going to have to deal with that next episode. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But anyway, I want to hear your thoughts about chapters 15 through 20 down below. And next week, we will be looking at chapters 21 through 26, which will be pages 193 to 235 in our lovely 1,000 Autumns book that Be Happy has gotten for me. Thank you so much. So yeah, we'll be looking at episode 5 of the audio drama and chapters 21 through 26 next week. But in the meantime, I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon to talk more about 1,000 Autumns. Bye.